Chapter 25 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 25. Days passed into weeks, and weeks into months, and Robin Hood was still to seek. The sheriff waged an intermittent warfare with him, scoring a few minor successes. Then Robin moved himself and his men farther afield. Many of the Nottingham apprentices and other roving spirits joined when they might with Robin and his band. Arthur à Bland, the tanner, who had so nearly won the sheriff's prize, had often in those days envious thoughts for the outlaws in their free life. Anything was better to his mind than oak bark and ditch water and the smell of half-tanned hides. Also he was ambitious to beat Robin at his own game. By dint of perseverance, Arthur had once come very nigh to emulating that masterly feat of archery by which Robin had wrested the purse of gold and the Arab horse from him. Vastly elated at this promise of success, the tanner had flung down his trade and had marched off towards Barnesdale, armed with his bow and a long pike-staff. He strode across the close turf, browning now under an August sun, and was soon far away from the high road and the small protection it offered. He espied a herd of deer, and prepared himself to shoot one of them. Just as his bow was bent, Robin came out of the bushes on his left hand, and, not noticing the tanner, the young outlaw began to move stealthily round to the windward side of the beasts, in order that they might make a fairer mark for his arrows. "What makes you here so like a thief, gossip?" inquired Arthur à Bland arrogantly. "I am a keeper in this forest, and it is my duty to stay you." "Have you any assistance, friend?" Robin asked, scarcely glancing towards him. "For it is not one man alone who will stop me." "Truly, gossip," cried Arthur, "I have no better assistance than this good oak-graff. But he will do all that I want. For your sword and your arrows I care not one straw. If I can get but a knock at your pole, you will ask me no further question." Robin unbuckled his belt at this, and flinging his bow upon the ground, tore down a young sapling that was growing near by. With his dagger he quickly lopped it into shape, and then strode up to the tanner. 8 foot and a half, and 'twill knock down a calf," sang Arthur, flourishing his staff still more, "and I hope it will knock down you." Robin sparred with him for a little, and then, making a sudden feint, bestowed such a blow on Master Bland that the blood ran down his cheek from his broken pate. But the tanner did not accept this favour without making some return, and soon was giving Robin as good as he gave. The wood rang with the noise of their blows, and the tanner laid on his strokes as if he were beating hides. "Hold your hand," cried Robin at last. "You have done enough, and I will make you free of these woods." "Why, God a mercy," said Arthur, "I may thank my staff for that, good fellow, not you." "Well, well, gossip, let that be as it may. But ere we continue, tell me your name and trade at the least. I fain would know who 'tis hath beaten me so well." "I am a tanner, gossip," replied Arthur, jovially now, "and by my soul, if you will come to my pits, I will tan your hide for naught." "In sooth, you have already done me that service," said Robin ruthfully. "But harkye, if you will leave your tan pots and come with me, as sure as my name is Robin Hood, you shall not want gold or fee." "If you be Robin Hood," said Arthur, "then I am Arthur à Bland, and I have come to live with you and my cousin Little John in the free woods of Barnesdale. that is, if you will have me." "I have already given you freedom of the woods, and you shall see what welcome Little John can offer," answered Robin. "But tell me, friend, are you not that archer who so nearly won the sheriff's horse from me in Nottingham town?" The tanner acknowledged himself to be the man, and since Robin put it so handsomely to him, he forgot all his hard thoughts about the defeat. They joined hands in friendship, and went together to find Little John, who seemed right glad to find his cousin ready to join the band. The day was spent in the usual free and happy manner, and when time for supper came round with the dusk, Robin asked Little John for the name and style of their guest at supper this night. "For," said Robin, "you must have got me at least a bishop, a baron, or a knight, or some squire from the north country, to meet our comrade tonight." "We have no guest, master," answered Little John regretfully. "Then I have no stomach for my supper," Robin cried. "Go you at once, Little John, and you Stuteley, and you also Much, and find us such a guest, worthy of our company, and well able to pay for the pleasure of it." "Where may they find so desirable a man?" asked the little ferret Midge, eagerly. "Go into Watling Street," Robin told them. "At this time of the year there are many people passing that way." "May heaven send us a guest speedily," said Arthur à Bland, "for I am growing wondrous hungry." The three outlaws started off at once and in high spirits, the adventure being one much to their liking. They had scarcely watched the great highroad known to all as Watling Street, and which runs from Dover in Kent to Chester town for many minutes, when they espied a knight riding by in a very forlorn and careless manner. One foot was in the stirrups, the other out. His visor was raised above his eyes, and his face was pinched and woebegone. Little John approached the stranger and bade him stay, for who can judge of a man's wealth by his looks? The outlaw saluted the knight courteously, and informed him that his master was fasting, having waited supper for him a full 3 hours. The knight reined in his sorry steed, and glanced toward his questioner with lack-lustre eye. Little John repeated his speech. "And who is your master?" asked the knight then. "None other than Robin Hood of Barnesdale," Little John returned, laying his great hand on the knight's bridle. "He bids us speed you to the feast." Seeing the other two, the knight shrugged his shoulders. "'Tis clear that this is an invitation which will brook no refusal," he said. "So I will go with you, friends." When they were returned to Barnesdale, Robin saluted the knight very magnificently, and his horse having been cared for, all sat down to a plentiful supper of venison, pheasants, and various small birds. After partaking liberally of the good cheer, the knight brightened up considerably, and declared that he had not enjoyed so good a meal for nigh 3 weeks, and he vowed that if ever Robin and his comrades should come to his country, he would entertain them with an equally worthy and honourable repast. This was not, however, the exact payment which Robin had intended. He thanked the knight, therefore, and reminded him that a yeoman like himself might hardly offer such a supper to a knight as a gift of charity. "I have no money, Master Hood. Nevertheless," answered the knight frankly, "I have so little of this world's goods, in sooth, that I should be ashamed to offer that which I have." "Money, however little, always finds a welcome from us," said Robin, smiling. "Will you deem me too impertinent, Sir Knight, if I ask what moneys you have?" "I have, of my own, 10 silver pennies," said the knight. "Here they are, and I wish they were 100 times as many." He handed Little John his pouch, and the big fellow soon had knowledge of its contents. It was, as the knight said, no more nor less. Robin filled his guest a bumper of wine, and made a sign for Little John to hand back the pouch. "Pledge me, Sir Knight," cried the merry outlaw, "and pledge me heartily, for these be sorry times. I see that your armour is bent, and that your clothes are worn. Tell me now, were you a yeoman, and made a knight by force? Or have you been bad steward to yourself, and wasted your property in lawsuits and the like? Be not bashful with me. We shall not betray your secrets. I am a Norman knight in my own right, and I have always lived a sober and quiet life," the sorrowful knight replied. "My father, and his father, and his father's father were all knights of the King. But as is often the case, friend Robin, rich men sometimes find their riches fly away from them, until within this last year I have contrived by dint of care and labour to live on the few hundreds of rent and the like which fall to me year by year. But now I have only these 10 pennies of silver, and my wife and children 3. Robin asked how his moneys had gone from him. "I lost them through misfortune and naught else," the knight declared, sighing. "I have a son, a good youth, who, when he was but 20 years of age, could play prettily in jousts and tournaments and other knightly games. He had the ill luck to push his sports too far, and did kill a knight of Lancashire in a battle à outrance. To save my boy I had to sell my lands and mortgage my estates, and this not being enough, in the end I have had to borrow money from my Lord of Hereford." "A most worthy bishop," said Robin, ironically. "I know him well." "He seemeth to be a hard man in law," said the knight, "and since I cannot pay him the 400 pieces, he has promised to foreclose his mortgage on our home." "Have you not any friends who would become a surety for you, Sir Knight?" queried Robin thoughtfully. "None. My friends have fallen away from me in mine adversity, as leaves from an autumn tree." "Fill your goblet again, Sir Knight," Robin commanded, and he turned to whisper a word in Marian's ear. She nodded and beckoned Little John and Much the Miller to her side. "Here is health and prosperity to you, gallant Robin," the knight said, tilting his goblet, "and my best thanks for your cheer. Would that I make better recompense." The 2 outlaws, with Mistress Marian, had now consulted the others, and all seemed to be agreed. Warrenton, as treasurer to the band, was sent into one of the inner caves, and presently returned, bearing a bag of gold. He counted it out before the knight, and there were 4 times 100 gold pieces. "Take this loan from us, Sir Knight, and pay your debt to the bishop," Robin told him. "Nay, no thanks. You are but exchanging creditors. Mayhap we shall not be so hard on you as was the Christian bishop. Yet again we may be harder. Who can say where human nature is concerned?" Much now appeared, dragging a bale of cloth. "The knight should have a suit worthy of his rank, master. Do you not think?" "Measure him 20 ells of it," Robin ordered. "Give him your Arab horse also," whispered Marian. "It is a gift which will come back to you fourfold, for this is a worthy man. My father doth know him well. So the horse was given also, and Robin bade Arthur a Bland ride as esquire to the knight, to be good use and to fulfil his first duty as one of the band. The knight was sorrowful no longer. He could scarcely voice his thanks to them, and was nigh overcome when time for his departure came round on the following morning. God save you, comrades, said he, with deep feeling in his tones, and give me a grateful heart. We shall wait for you 12 months from today, here in this place, said Robin, smiling cheerfully, and then you will repay us for the loan of the gold. I shall return it to you within a year, replied the knight firmly. So sure as I am Sir Richard of the Lee, the money shall be returned, with interest beside. Look for me in the early days of March, friends, for then I can expect to have good news of my son. Then, or later, Sir Knight, as you will, said Robin. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK, Chapter 26. The sheriff, having failed to ensnare Robin Hood, and Master Simeon having done so little better, it became clear that a more wise person than either must attempt the business. The demoiselle Marie had recovered from her fit of anger, and announced her intention of showing them both how such an affair should be approached. To this end she employed herself in archery, and won some accomplishment in the sport. Then she caused Master Fitzwalter's house to be searched thoroughly, and any writings of his to be brought to her. Mistress Monceux engaged her fingers next in a pretty schooling, teaching them to hold a pen as awkwardly as might Master Fitzwalter himself. So she produced at last a writing purporting to come from him to Maid Marian, his daughter. She wrote it simply and in a few words. This, to my dear child Marian, from her affectionate father, Henry Fitzwalter, now in the court of St. James, in London town. I send you all greetings, and am well, both in mind and spirit. I pray God that he has kept you as jealousy in my long absence from home. This is to tell you, dear heart, that after all I shall return to Nottingham, mayhap very soon, and that you are to provide accordingly. I have had tidings of you given to me by my Lord Bishop of Hereford, and now send you this by the hand of his man, who returns to Nottingham on other business of my lord's. I pray you to remain closely in Nottingham during my absence. Signed, Fitzwalter, Warden of the City Gates, the 25th day of August, 1188. The demoiselle Marie had made several attempts before she had succeeded in producing a letter so entirely to her satisfaction, and when she had sealed the above with the Fitzwalter arms and had addressed it, she felt such a glow of pride in it that she could scarce bring herself to part with the missive. At length she bade one of her maids fetch Master Simeon to her. When, all delighted, he stood before her, his love handed him the note. "Take this, dear fool," said she kindly, "and bring it to the hand of the maid Fitzwalter. She is with the outlaws in Barnesdale, hidden in one of their deeps, no doubt. I care not how you give it to her, as long as you are speedy. I will send it by the hand of Roger, your father's cook. He is well acquainted with their hiding-places." "That would be to spoil my plot at its outset," Marie answered cuttingly. "Gather your wandering wits, and bethink you of some more likely messenger. Have you not someone in this town who can be trusted?" "I have the very man for it," suddenly cried Carfax. "There is a young knight, one who hath been exiled by the king for plotting with Prince John. He is the only son of our fiery neighbour Montfichet. He hath done secret work for the prince, and will do it again if he believes that he hath need for it." "You are for ever employed in doubtful business," said Marie crossly. "I do not like your fiddling with Prince John. You may be sure that Richard will succeed to the throne, and then we shall see where your plottings have brought you." "Richard hath already succeeded," said Carfax whisperingly. "I had the news but an hour since. Old Henry of Angevin is king no more. He is dead, and Richard Coeur de Lion, as the commoners do call him, hath gone to Palestine, all unknowing that he is king." "Do you think that John may seize the throne?" sneered Marie Monceux, unconvinced. "Let it be, I tell you, Simeon. In any case we must destroy these outlaws of Sherwood, or they will destroy us. If they be not exterminated by the end of this year, my father will cease to be sheriff." "May the Lord forbid!" cried Carfax, startled. "Ay, and we shall be poor folk, Simeon, unworthy of you, no doubt. But that is not yet. Take this note, and send it how you will, so long as it comes to this girl's hands within 2 days." Carfax accepted the charge, and went into the lodgings of one who had entered the town within the last few hours. None other, indeed, than Geoffrey de Montfichet, who had brought Master Simeon the startling news of the king's sudden death. Geoffrey perceived that he might openly show himself now if the sheriff would but ignore the dead king's decree of exile passed upon him. He was sounding Carfax in the matter, and the wily go-between was temporizing in his usual way, trying to make some gain to himself out of the one or the other of them. "If you will but carry this letter to Mistress Fitzwalter, who is with thy cousin Robin Fitzooth in Barnesdale, Sir Knight," said Simeon plausibly, "you will win the gratitude of the sheriff's daughter, at the least, and she doth rule the roost here, as I can tell you. 'Tis but a letter from Master Fitzwalter to his child." "I know the woods, and will take the note," Geoffrey said. "See to it that Monceux does not move against me." "His girl will tie his hands, if need be," grinned Carfax. "Ay, she can drive us all. God speed you, Sir Knight." It fell out that whilst Robin was walking alone near the high road to York, close to that very bridge whereon he had fought with Little John, he perceived a smart stranger dressed in scarlet and silk. Just as Robin espied this gay gentleman, and was marvelling at his daring in walking these woods so coolly, unattended by squire or guard, the knight deftly fitted an arrow to his bow, and with a clever shot brought down a fine stag. "Well hit!" cried Robin, who could never abstain from admiration of a good bowman. "You have used your bow full well, Sir Knight." The Scarlet Knight turned towards Robin, and taking him for some husbandman or hind, called out in high tones, asking how he dared to speak to his betters in that insolent way. "How is one to know one's betters, Sir Knight?" queried Robin cheerfully. A noble is not always known by his dress, but rather by his manners and his deeds. Your insolence shall be well paid for, returned the other, putting by his bow and drawing his sword. Without further argument he approached Robin angrily and struck at him with meaning. Robin was too quick for him, however, and caught the blow upon the edge of his own trusty blade. After a few passes Robin feinted, and catching the other unawares, dealt him a thwack with the flat of his blade. The scarlet stranger reeled under the blow. "I find you are not so mean a person as I had thought," observed he, in a series of gasps. "Yet even now 'tis not amiss that you should have a lesson." With that the two engaged heartily, and fought for nigh on an hour, without either side gaining an advantage. At length he succeeded in pricking Robin on the cheek. "Hast enough, fellow?" "A rest would be welcome," admitted Robin with a laugh. They called a truce and sat down side by side beneath a tree. The stranger eyed Robin thoughtfully, and Robin glanced back at him, with his suspicions slowly growing to certainty. Presently, "You are he whom they call Robin Hood, I take it," said the stranger, "although I do not know you by such a strange name." "It is my own name," replied the outlaw, "and I am proud of it. Are you not Geoffrey of Gamewell?" "That was my name, cousin, even as yours was once Robin Fitzooth. But now I call myself Will Scarlet. 'Tis a whimsy, but since Geoffrey Montfichet has a bigger price on his head than I can afford to pay, why, I have buried him under a prettier name. But tell me why you are dressed so plainly. On my life, I did not know you when we first met." "A man should have clothes to suit his work, cousin," argued Robin, "and 'tis a wonder to me that you should have been able to kill yon stag with such a wild colour upon you. Howbeit, thy arrow was shrewd enough, and I'll say no more than to tell you how well pleased I am to have fallen in with you again. Here's my hand, in all true affection, cousin Scarlet." "And mine, cousin Hood." They carried the stag between them to Barnesdale, and Robin learned that his cousin had a letter with him for Marian. When Robin heard who had given it to Will Scarlet, his suspicions were immediately awakened. "However, let us give Marian the letter and see what she may think upon it," he observed. "There cannot be much harm in that." Thus did Mistress Monceux succeed admirably in the first part of her scheme. Soon as Marian had had her letter, she was all agog to go back into Nottingham. She showed the scroll to Robin, and though his heart misgave him, he could hardly say her nay. No doubt as to the genuineness of the letter occurred to Marian. She knew her father's peculiarly awkward handwriting too well. Certainly the phrasing of it seemed a little too easy for so plain a man. Yet, since he had been so long in London, he had, of course, acquired court ways. On the 3rd week in September, Marian determined to return to her old home and take the risk of any treachery. "Allan a Dale and Fennel shall go with you, dear heart," said Robin. "Why not? They can appear as your father's guests, and the two maids will help you keep house. Also, Warrenton shall go as Allan's man. I can be sure that these faithful ones will guard my pretty love from all harm." "Am I indeed your pretty love?" asked Marian in foolish happiness. "Are you sure that you would not have some other maid, to wit, the Demoiselle Marie? She hath an eye for you, as I know, for all she seemeth so much our enemy. Trust a woman for finding out another woman's secret. Mistress Fennel was not loath to leave the greenwood. In the summer months the life was none too bad a one, but now that September mists and rains were upon Barnesdale, the young wife shivered and complained. Hereford is the only one we need fear, after all, Allan admitted. Your old baron would never look for us in Nottingham. And the bishop is in London, said Marian, showing her letter. See what my father saith. Therefore Robin and his men were left to their own devices in the matter of cooking and kitchen work, soon as September's third week had come and gone. Allan a Dale, Warrenton, the two girls and their two maids, all travelled into Nottingham on the best horses that the outlaws could provide, under escort so far as Gamewell. They were secretly watched into the town, that Robin might be sure no one attempted any treachery. It was arranged that Allan should come himself to Gamewell and seek the squire's friendship on some near occasion. Then he might tell the old man about Marian and how she had left his roof. Montfichet would not be vexed with her, Marian felt. If he were, she would come herself and coax him. Also, either Allan or Warrenton would find means to send Robin news of the household and tell him whether Fitzwalter returned as the latter promised. So, all safeguards that wit could devise were taken, and Robin, having kissed her little fingers very tenderly, left Marian with her cortège upon the road by Gamewell, and having satisfied himself that all had gained safe entrance to Nottingham, journeyed back to the caves at Barnesdale with quiet mien. His heart told him to suspect some evil plot, yet where could he find one? Scarlet, his own cousin, had brought the letter, and Marian had recognized the writing. Oh, how dull the caves and woods seemed without her! Tuck and the miller had employed themselves in cooking them all a royal dinner, and Stuteley tried his best to lighten the gloom. Robin laughed with them and sought to hide his grief, feeling it to be unmanly. But never had he enjoyed a feast so little in the free woods as this one. Good food and good company he had, but not that salt with which to savour them. A merry heart. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 27. The autumn ripened into winter. Allan found means to send Robin news of them often. Master Fitzwalter had not returned, but had sent another letter saying that he would do so ere long. They were all happy and unmolested in the city. Of the sheriff and his daughter they had seen nothing. That Warrenton was well, and that they had gotten them a man-cook and other servants. Marian wrote little crabbed messages to him. Brief and ill-spelt as they were, they became Robin's chiefest treasures. Marian forbore making any attempt to see her love, for fear that she might be watched and followed, and so bring about Robin's capture. She fretted sorely at this restraint placed on her by Allan's more prudent hands. The demoiselle Marie had made a miscalculation. She knew that presently Robin would seek Marian, even in the lion's mouth. Then would come the day of the sheriff's triumph. The little house of the Fitzwalters was spied upon from within. No one bethought them of this new cook. Had Little John once espied him, there would have been a different tale to tell, however. He had offered his services to Warrenton at a small premium, saying that he had lost his last place with being too fond of his bed. He said his name was Roger de Burgh, and that he came of good family. The wages he asked were so small, and he seemed so willing, and had been so frank as to his failing, that Marian bade him take up his quarters forthwith in her father's house. Life passed uneventfully for them in the Fitzwalter household. It was neither happy nor unhappy. Mistress Fennel found it vastly more amusing than the draughty caves of Barnesdale. But then Mistress Fennel had her dear, and Marian had not. She was vaguely disturbed at her father's lengthened absence. Surely he should by now have determined where he would live, Nottingham or London. The months crawled on, and Christmas came and went. Marian was still tied to Nottingham streets, and Robin to Barnesdale woods. This state of inactivity had told much upon the greenwood men, upon Little John most of all. At last the big fellow fell out with Friar Tuck, and began to grumble at every one in turn. Robin, in despair, bade him go into Nottingham to see how the land lay there. "If you must be breaking someone's head, Little John, let it be one of our enemies who shall suffer. But have a care, for your tongue is as long as your body. Choose a cunning disguise, therefore." "I will go as a beggar," said Little John, brightening up at the prospect of adventure. "For a beggar may chatter as much as he will. 'Tis part of his trade." So, clad all in rags, and bent double as though with age, Little John went forth from their caves on a February morning. He supported himself with a stout oak staff, and carried 2 great bags upon his shoulders. One held his food, and the other was to be refuge for anything of note that he might find left about, such as sheriff's plate, to wit, or a bishop's valuables. He encountered 4 fellows of the like profession near by Nottingham North Gate. One was dumb, another blind, the other 2 halt and lame. "Give you good morrow, brothers," said he, in a gruff voice. "It's my fortune that brings me to you, for I am in sore need of company. What is there a doing in Nottingham, since the bells be ringing a merrily? Are they hanging a man or skinning a beggar?" "Neither one nor the other, you crooked churl," replied one of the crippled beggars. "The sheriff is returned from London with his daughter, and the folk are giving him a welcome, such as you will never have from the city. Stand back, for there is no room for you here. 4 of us, as it is, are too many, and we have come here to settle who shall go on and who turn back." "And how will you settle such a knotty point, gossip?" "Marry, with our sticks," reported the beggar threateningly. "But first we will dispose of you." And he made a fierce blow at Little John. "If it be a fight that your stomachs are yearning for, why, I am the man for you all," Little John said at once, "and I will beat the 4 of you heartily, whether you be friends or enemies." Then he began to twirl his staff right merrily, and gave the dumb fellow such a crack upon his crown that he began to roar lustily. "Why, I am a doctor, then, since I can cure dumbness," cried the outlaw. "Now let me see whether I can mend your broken leg, gossip." And he cut the first cripple so suddenly across the shins that he dropped his staff and commenced to dance with pain. "Now for your eyes, friend." But the blind one did not wait for the cure. He took to his heels forthwith, running surprisingly straight. The other lame one ran after him full as fast. Little John caught them after a short chase, and dusted their rags thoroughly. "Give you good day, brothers," said he. Then, well satisfied, "Now I am going to welcome the Sheriff, and, as you say, Nottingham is too small a place for us all. Therefore speed you towards Lincoln. 'Tis a pretty town, and none too far for such strong legs." His flourishing stick spoke even more eloquently. The four of them shuffled away speedily, sore in their minds and bodies. Nottingham was gay indeed. The Sheriff had returned from London, where he had been in order to gain more time for the capture of Robin Hood and his men. His daughter had complete faith in the scheme. It was bound in the end to be successful. "Be patient, and all will be well," she told her father. But Christmas was the end of the time which Prince John had allowed Monceux for Robin's capture. Therefore both the Sheriff and his daughter had journeyed to court to see what instructions had been left, and whether they might not get the time extended. They contrived, by spending much money in bribes and in giving grand entertainments, to achieve their ends. King Richard was away in the Holy Land. Prince John was well employed in stirring up the barons to espouse him as king while there was such an opening. There was thus no actual monarch, and none in the court to care much about the Sheriff or Robin. Those high in authority accepted the Sheriff's bribes, and bade him take till doomsday. Squire Montfichet, who was, as we know, a staunch supporter of the old order of things, would recognize no other king than Richard. As a matter of fact, the old man had no great love for him, but he was, after all, the true king, and Montfichet threw all his weight into the scale against John. The Saxon nobles were also active, feeling that now was their chance to recover power. So Monceux and the demoiselle saw for themselves that they had nothing to fear from the court, at any rate. They had stayed and enjoyed themselves in the city, and the Sheriff was able to make himself presently very useful. The Princess of Aragon, one of the court beauties, had need of an escort to York. She was going there to be married, much against her royal will, to one of the great Saxon notables. This was an arrangement made by the Richard party in the hopes of winning the Saxons to themselves, as against John, who had already Salisbury, de Bray, and the cunning Fitzooth upon his side. The Sheriff had arrived with his train in great state, just as Little John entered Nottingham. The outlaw came in by the north gate, as Monceux, proud of escorting the pretty princess, entered by the south. Nottingham was gay with bunting and flags, and the bells were ringing noisily. It was a royal procession, and soon as Little John was able to join with it, his bag began to swell rapidly. Many a pocket did his sharp knife slice away from the side of unsuspecting wealthy citizens. Sports were held in the fields, and the beggar had a merry time of it. Towards nightfall his bags were both filled, and he began to think it about time to attend to the commissions which Robin had laid upon him. This was to convey a letter to Marian, and to discover how Allan a Dale and his little wife were faring. Little John shuffled with his bags along the narrow streets until he came to the house. He began to cry his wares, calling out that he was ready to change new goods for old ones, that he would buy old clothes and give good money for them. Marian and the rest had, however, gone to see the sights, for there were to be illuminations. Only Roger the cook had been left in charge, and he, having glanced once at the noisy beggar, angrily bade him begone. Little John only shouted the louder, and the cook furiously flung to the casement windows. The beggar passed by the house slowly, still calling "Old clothes," as if he had not even noticed the angry cook. Yet Roger's few angry words had awoke sharp recognition in Little John. "By my rags and bags," muttered he, amazed, "this rascal needeth much killing." The scene in the sheriff's kitchen rose before him. "This time I will fling you into the river, Master Roger, be sure of it. I wonder what evil hath brought you to this house of all others. If by chance you have harmed any one of them, vengeance shall fall upon you, swift and deadly." A thin rain had commenced to fall, and so the beggar turned back. The house was dark and silent. The beggar stopped in front of it uncertainly, grumbling under his breath at the driving rain. Just as he was about to move toward the door, the click of its latch warned him to jump back into the shadows of the next house. A white face looked out of the Fitzwalter home, stealthily peering right and left. Little John crept further into the shadows. The cook came out into the wet road. He seemed to be scared and troubled. After a moment's pause he returned to the house, entered it silently, and Little John heard the latch click once more. "Now, what mischief is in the air?" thought Little John. "Some knavish business, doubtless, or my friend Roger would not be in it. By my faith, I do distrust that man." He went back into the middle of the road with his sacks, and commenced crying his wares afresh. Almost at once Roger opened the door again. "A murrain upon you, noisy rascal!" he called. "Can you not be still?" "Ay, truly, an it pay me," answered Little John, lurching towards him as though he were tipsy. "Can I strike a bargain with you, gossip?" "What have you in the sacks, beggar?" "Everything in the world, brother. I have gifts for the rich, presents for the poor." "Have you anything fit for a cook?" asked Roger. "I have a basting spoon and a spit." "I will give you meat and bread, much as you can carry, if you have such a spoon as my kitchen lacks," whispered Roger. Little John dived his hand into a sack and brought out a silver ladle which he had stolen from a shop that day. Roger took it eagerly, and his fingers were icy cold. "Put your sacks down by the door, dear gossip," said Roger, after a moment's pause. "Here they will be out of the rain. I must go within to examine this ladle." "Have you not a tankard of ale to give me?" begged Little John. "I am worn with the day." "Enter, friend," Roger said then. "Tread lightly, for fear we disturb my folk." He took Little John into the dark passage. "I'll bring your sacks in for you whilst you are here," continued Roger, very obligingly, and before the other could say him yea or nay, he had pulled the sacks into the house and had closed the door tightly. It was very dark, and Little John thought it only prudent to keep his fingers on his knife. He heard the cook rustling about near to him, and presently came a faint sound, as if one of the sacks had bulged forward and shifted its contents. "Hasten with the ale, good friend," whispered Little John hoarsely. "I feel mighty drowsy in this close place. Soon I shall be asleep." Roger's voice answered him then softly from the end of the narrow hall, and almost at once the cook appeared with a lantern. He came creakingly over the boards and handed Little John a mug of beer. "Your ladle is of the right sort, dear gossip," he announced, "and I will give you a penny for it." 20 silver pennies is my price for the spoon," answered Little John, tossing off the ale at a draught. "Give it to me, brother, or return me my spoon. I do not find your ale to my taste," he added, wiping his mouth. Roger opened the door roughly. "Then begone, ungrateful churl," he cried, forgetting his caution. He tried to push Little John roughly out into the night. "What? Would you try to steal my bags?" roared Little John, suddenly snatching hold of Roger by the scruff of his neck. "You villain! You rascally wretch! You withered apple!" He tossed and shook Roger like a rat, and finally flung him into the centre of the muddy road. "Help! Help!" screamed the cook, at the full pitch of his voice. "Help! A thief! A thief! Help! Murder! Help!" His cries at once attracted notice. The dull, dead street became instantly alive. With an angry exclamation, Little John dashed into the passage, seized up his bags, and fled, stepping upon the writhing body of the cook as he ran. Little John turned the first corner at top speed. 3 men rushed at him with drawn swords. He swung his bags right and left, and felled 2 of them. The third he butted with his head, and the man asked no more. Under the wet, driving night, Little John ran. The bags sadly impeded him, but he would not let them go. He darted down a little court to avoid a dozen clutching hands, and fancied he now had safety. He paused, drawing in his breath with a sob. The race had tried him terribly. The court was all dark, and his pursuers had overshot it. Next instant, however, they recovered the scent, and were upon him full cry. Little John, snatching his bags, dashed up to the end of the alley. There was a door which yielded to him. Next instant he had plunged into the open, lighted space before Nottingham Castle, into the midst of a shouting throng. The illuminations had not been a success, owing to the rain, but they gave enough light to achieve Little John's undoing. The beggar was seized, and his bags were torn from him, just as those other pursuers sprang out through the alley. "He hath robbed a house and killed a man," shouted the foremost. "Hold him fast and sure." "Nay, I have killed no one," cried the giant, struggling hopelessly and desperately. "Take my bags, and you will. I was but bearing them to my master." "Pretty goods to be carrying indeed," said a voice, as someone turned one bag upside down. Onto the hard, wet stones rolled a number of things collected by this industrious outlaw: pockets, daggers, purses, knives, pieces of gold, and pennies of silver, a motley company of valuables. "They are my master's," panted Little John furiously. "Let them be." "See what he hath in the other sack," cried another. "He seemeth to have robbed our butchers also." The sack was opened, and the contents laid bare. A sudden silence fell upon the crowd, a silence of horror and hate. Then 1,000 tongues spoke at once, and Little John, frozen cold with loathing, saw under the flickering lamps a dreadful thing. Out of the second sack had fallen the limbless trunk of a dead man, cold and appalling even in this uncertain light. A head, severed through the jugular arteries, rolled at his feet, grinning and ghastly. "'Tis Master Fitzwalter," whispered one in a lull. "Dead and dishonoured." The clamour became deafening. and Little John felt his senses failing fast. He was beaten and struck at by them all. They tore at him and cursed him. Their blows and their rage were as nothing beside the thought of that awful thing upon the ground. The crowd and the lamps reeled and swam before the outlaw's eyes and became blurred. But the grim vision of that dreadful body became plainer and plainer to him. It assumed terrible proportions, shutting out all else. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK, Chapter 28. As the days sped on and nothing was heard of Little John, Robin began to grow more and more anxious. He made up his mind to go himself into Nottingham, and there see Marian, and discover, and if need be, rescue his faithful herdsman. All the greenwood men were against him in this, however, and for once had their own way. "Let me go, master," begged Stuteley, "for my life is of little account compared with yours." "I will go," said Scarlet. "There is no such animus in the Sheriff's mind against me as he hath against the rest of you. I can ask for Master Carfax, and he will perforce treat me fairly." "I am not so sure of it," said Robin significantly. "I would not trust Master Simeon further than a rope would hold him. Still, what you say is fair enough, cousin, and if you will go into the city for us, we shall all be grateful. For my part, I would dearly like to accompany you." "Your duty is here," answered Scarlet. "Rely on me. I will find out what hath chanced to Little John, and will also attend Mistress Fitzwalter." Will Scarlet started at once, and bore himself so well that he made sight of Gamewell within 2 hours. He paused for a moment without his father's house, regarding the old place with half-scornful eyes. Then, "What is to be, must be," said Will, to hearten himself. He walked on toward Nottingham meditatively. If he could have met old Gamewell, then and there he would have stopped him and asked his forgiveness. 'Twas in the morning, the sweet fresh morn, in the happy woods, wherein birds fluttered and sang tenderly, and the peaceful deer fed placidly on the close grass of the glades. This sylvan picture was disturbed rudely for him. A stag, wild and furious, dashed out suddenly from amongst the trees, scattering the does in terrified alarm. The vicious beast eyed Will in his bright dress, and lowering its head, charged at him furiously. Will nimbly sprang aside, and having gained shelter of an oak, scrambled hurriedly into its branches. The stag turned about and dashed itself at the tree. "Now am I right glad not to be in your path, gentle friend," murmured Scarlet, trying to fix himself on the branches so that he might be able to draw an arrow. "Sorry indeed would be anyone's plight who should encounter you in this black humour." Scarcely had he spoken when he saw the stag suddenly startle and fix its glances rigidly on the bushes to the left of it. These were parted by a delicate hand, and through the opening appeared the figure of a young girl. She advanced, unconscious alike of Will's horrified gaze and the evil fury of the stag. She saw the beast standing as if irresolute there, and held out her hand to it with a pretty gesture, making a little sound with her lips as if to call it to her side. "For the love of God, dear lady!" cried Will, and then the words died on his throat. With a savage snort of rage, the beast had rushed at this easy victim, and with a side blow of its antlers had stretched her upon the ground, it now lowered its head, preparing to gore her to death. Already its cruel horns had brushed across her once. A piteous cry rang through the woods. Will set his teeth and swung himself to the ground noiselessly. Then he quickly dropped to his knees and was aiming his shaft while the stag was making ready for a more deadly effort. Will's arrow struck it with terrific force, full in the centre of its forehead. The stag fell dead across the body of the fainting maid. Will Scarlet had soon dragged the beast from off the girl, and had picked her up in his strong arms. He bore her swiftly to the side of one of the many brooks in the vale. He dashed cool water upon her face, roughly almost, in his agony of fear that she was already dead, and he could have shed tears of joy to see those poor closed eyelids tremble. He redoubled his efforts, and presently she gave a little gasp. "Where am I? What is it?" "You are here, dear maid, in the forest of Sherwood, and are safe." She opened her eyes then and sat up. "Methinks that there was danger about me, and death," she said, wonderingly. Then recognition shone in her face, and she incontinently began to bind her fallen hair and tidy her disordered dress. "Is it you, indeed, Master Scarlet?" she asked. "Ay, 'tis I, and thank heaven in time to do you a service." Will's tones were deep and full of feeling. "I am always in your debt, Master Will," she said, pouting, "and now you have me at a grievous disadvantage. Tell me where you have been, and why you did leave Cousin Richard and France." "Once I had no safety there," replied Will, with meaning, "neither for myself nor for my heart. As for leaving Richard's court, why, foolishly I would always be where you are." "So you have followed me, then? Is that what I am to believe?" The maid smiled. "I will confess I did know that you were come to London, and I was glad, Will, for I had not too many friends in England, nor have them now, it would seem. But why was there no safety for you in London, and where have you hidden yourself of late?" "There is a price upon my head. I am in exile. You know me as Will Scarlet, but in sooth my name is not so Saxon." "I hate the Saxons," said the maid pettishly. She had risen to her feet, but still was troubled about her tumbled hair. "I am to be married to one, and so have run away. That is why I am wandering in this stupid wood." "Call it not stupid. It hath brought you to me once more," whispered Will, taking her hands. "So you do not love this man after all? Is it so? Had I but known." "Didst leave London because of that?" asked she, lightly. "Ay, but men know how to cozen us. I'll not believe a foolish thing, not if you were to tell it me 1,000 times." "I'll tell it to you once, sweetheart. I did leave London because I learned that you were to be married to another. Life had no more to teach me than that one thing, and it was enough. For what was left for me to learn? I had loved you, and loved you so well, and had loved you in vain." "Had loved, Will? Is thy love so small, then, that it burns out like a candle within an hour? I had believed—" But Master Scarlet suddenly took this wilful maid to his heart. "I do love you, oh, my dear, with all my body and my life, till the end of ends, in waking and sleeping, and so I pledge my troth." She struggled out of his arms. "I am encumbered with wild beasts at each step," cried she. all rosy and breathless. One would kill me for blind rage, the other for love. Oh, I do not know which to fear the most. There, you may kiss my hand, Will, and I will take you for my man, since it seems that I am to be married whether I will or no. But you must carry the tidings to my Saxon in York, and beshrew me, I hope he will not take it too hardly, for your sake, and yours also. Scarlet was holding her again. I like you well enough to be sorry if he should hurt you, said this teasing little princess. She looked up at him and then dropped her lashes. Do you truly love me, Will? For truly do I love you. And so the Princess of Aragon elected to marry Geoffrey of Montfichet, notwithstanding the politic choice of husband made for her by the wise old men in London town. They walked on together towards Nottingham, quietly and in deep content with the world. They encountered a stately little cavalcade near by the gates of the city, and knew themselves observed ere they could hope to avoid them. Putting a bold face on it, the lovers stood on one side to permit this company to pass them. An old man, richly dressed, came first, followed at a respectful distance by 6 horsemen. The princess watched them in happy indifference. Her frank glance roved from one to the other of the would-be steadfast faces before her. She turned her head to gaze again at the absorbed old man who led the company. Then she checked herself in a little exclamation and hastily averted her face. It was too late. The old fellow had been roused from his apathy. He reined in his grey horse and asked over his shoulder, "Who are these, Jacqueline?" The esquire so addressed at once rode forward, but before he could speak his master had discovered an answer for himself. He had fixed fierce eyes upon Master Scarlet, and made a scornful gesture. "So 'tis you, Geoffrey, daring death now for the sake of some country wench? Ay, but you will end upon the gallows for sure." "I shall not ask you to pray at my bedside," retorted Scarlet bitterly. The princess suddenly whipped round. "Who are you, Sir Churl, to talk of gallows and the like to us? Hast come from a hanging thyself? There is one afoot in Nottingham, I mind me." It was now the turn of the old knight to exclaim. "Princess, you?" gasped he in sheer amaze. He tumbled from his horse to the ground, and with old-fashioned courtesy knelt before her. She put out her hand for him to kiss. "Rise, Master Montfichet, I pray you. 'Tis not your place to kneel to me," she said, with her little court smile. The other horsemen had dismounted, and now stood apart from the trio. The princess was the first to speak, so soon as the old squire had risen. "Master Montfichet and Will Scarlet, pray let me make you known to each other," she said prettily. "This is Squire George of Gamewell, a good friend and honest adviser to me, although I do not always listen to him as I should." She laughed easily. "This is Master Will Scarlet, whom I have known both in France and now again in England. He hath but now saved me from a dreadful death." She paused, then added quickly and a little nervously, "My life is his, in short, Master Montfichet, and so I have given it to him. We are to be married and live in the greenwood. Therefore, you are not to speak slightingly of Master Scarlet in my presence." Consternation, astonishment, and gratification struggled together mightily in the squire's breast. "Geoffrey? You?" he said again. "But this is beyond belief." "Therefore believe it," spoke the princess lightly, "for that will show you to be no common man." "Sir," said Geoffrey, kneeling before his father, "I pray you, forgive both my rash words just now and all my seeming ingratitude. I am very fain to be friends again with you, and I do swear to be more dutiful in the years to come. Will you take my hand?" "Ay, freely as it is offered. God save us! But who am I to be stubborn of will in the face of these miracles?" "Do the miracles work happiness for you, Master Montfichet?" inquired the maid archly. "Ay, marry, but the King will never consent to this business. Be sure of it. You marrying my son, a commoner?" "Your son?" It was now the princess's turn to be amazed, but soon the matter was explained to her. "So, Will, you have begun by deceiving me. A bad beginning. I was trying to tell you, dear heart, when we made this encounter. Was I not saying that my father lived near by here? Did I not tell you that he was a Norman? There, do not fret your dear self. I will marry you, whether you be Will Scarlett or Geoffrey of Montfichet. It is yourself I need, after all. Take my steed and ride with us to Gamewell. There at least I must keep thee, princess, until the King hath given his sanction to this marriage. You to rule over Gamewell? In sooth, I will be a joyful man upon that day." "And I," murmured Master Scarlett. So they turned back towards Gamewell, and only when they were in sight of it did Scarlett remember poor Little John. Then he stopped short, reining in the horse which one of the knights had lent to him. The princess had accepted loan of the esquire Jacqueline's palfrey. Will soon had told them this errand, which he had come so near to forgetting altogether. "If this be the man they call John Little Nailor," said the princess, sorrowfully, "why, he is in perilous plight. You have but just ridden through Nottingham, I take it, Master Montfichet, and have some of its news?" "They do not seem yet to know of your adventurings, princess." "No, surely. For what is a woman, missing or to hand, when there is red murder abroad? This poor fellow, whom I believe to be innocent, was accused of theft by a rascally cook, and was pursued. 'Twas the night of our return. They chased him from pillar to post, and presently caught him close to the castle. He had 2 bags with him." "'Tis Little John, then," cried Scarlett. "I saw him go out with the sacks across his back." "In one of them they found many things that other folk had strangely lost," said the princess, with a little grimace. "In the other there was the dead, dishonoured body of a good citizen, foully done to death." Her listeners stared in their amazement. "It is a Master Fitzwalter who hath been so cruelly murdered," continued the princess, her colour coming and going. "This Little John swears that the cook did kill his master, and while he, Little John, was resting in Fitzwalter's house, this rascal fellow must have changed the sacks. Fitzwalter, the warden of the gates? I knew him well. Why, he left us but 3 weeks since to travel to Nottingham. It seems that he had sent a messenger to his girl there, that she was to follow him, but either his letter miscarried or the maid would not. So poor Fitzwalter, busy as he was, must needs return to meet his death." "Who is this cook?" asked Scarlett. "An evil character he hath altogether. Once he was of an outlaw robber band, headed here in these very woods under one Will of Cloudsley." "Tell me, is he called Roger de Burgh?" asked Will. "That is his name," answered the princess, surprised. Do you know aught of him?" "I know much evil of him," replied her lover, and then he told them how this very Roger had planned to take his, Will's, life, and how Robin had saved him. The squire nodded. "I remember," said he, slowly. "Ay, Robin was always a good lad. This news of yours will stagger him, for he is betrothed to Mistress Fitzwalter, daughter of him who hath so dreadfully met his end." "The two of them were arraigned, I must tell you," went on the princess, "and both were to be racked. But they did not put it too hardly upon Master Roger, as I have reason to know, wherefore he was able to maintain his innocence, while the other, in his bitter anguish, made confession of a crime which he never did commit." "And they are hanging him whilst I stand idly here," cried Scarlett, turning to horse. "I must leave you, sweet. Forgive me. Here is a man's life in the balance." "What would you, Will?" she asked fearfully. "The hanging is fixed for the Thursday in next week." "Before then he shall be free," said Will Scarlett firmly. "Farewell, dear heart. Wait for me here at Gamewell. My father will be good host to you, I know." "The maid Fitzwalter was lodging with us when I was called to London," the squire began. "She is now in Nottingham, sir. It is a story I will tell you later. Now give me farewell and your blessing." "God's blessing be in you, Geoffrey, my son," said the squire. It was the first time for many years that he had called Geoffrey by that name. "And take all my heart with you, Will." The voice of this little princess was husky, and a sob sounded in her throat. "Be cautious, and return soon to me." She watched his swift retreating figure as he sped towards Nottingham, there to argue it with Master Carfax. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 29. The day after Scarlett's departure found Robin in frantic mood. 2 emissaries had he sent out to gain news of Marian, and neither had returned. He had had now no direct tidings of her for nigh on 3 months. Little John's silence, too, disturbed him. Robin determined that he would see Marian at least this day, or die in the attempt. So, notwithstanding all that the rest could urge, their leader started away on foot toward the city. He walked quickly, and his mind was so filled with dreadful thoughts that he exercised little of his usual care. Emerging suddenly upon the high road, he plunged almost into the arms of his enemy, the Lord Bishop of Hereford. It was too late for Robin to retreat, and he was too far away for him to wind his horn in the hope of rousing his men. The bishop rode at the head of a goodly company, and had already espied him. About a mile away, near by the roadside, was a little tumble-down cottage. Robin remembered it, and saw his only chance of safety. At once he doubled back through the underwood, much to the surprise of the bishop, who thought he had truly disappeared by magic. In a few minutes Robin had come to the little cottage. The owner of the place, a little crabbed old woman, rose up with a cry of alarm. "'Tis I, Robin Hood. Where are your 3 sons?" "They are with you, Robin. Well do you know that. Do they not owe life to you?" "Help now repay the debt," said Robin in a breath. "The bishop will soon be without, and he has many men." "I will save you, Robin," cried the old woman bustlingly. "We will change raiment, and you shall go forth as the poor lone woman of this cot. Go without and strip yourself speedily, and throw me your clothes through the doorway." Robin was in the garden, and had slipped out of his Lincoln green in a moment. He clad himself with equal celerity in the old woman's rags as she flung them out to him one by one. The bishop perceived an old decrepit woman hobbling across the road as he with his company came hastening down it. He bade one of his fellows to stay her and ask if she had seen such and such a man. The soldier gave her a full and vivid description of Robin Hood. The old woman, thus rudely prevented from gathering her sticks, already she had a little handful of them, answered that there was a man within her cottage, and that she would be right glad if my Lord Bishop would cause him to be driven out of it. In sooth, my good gentleman, he is none other than that vagabond Robin Hood, piped she. Enough, cried the bishop triumphantly. Enter the cottage, men, beat down the door if need be. A purse of gold pieces is already offered for the capture of Robin Hood, and I will give 100 beside. The old woman was released, and went on gathering twigs for her fire. Little by little she edged towards the forest, and while the bishop's men were beating down her cottage door, she vanished between the trees. Then she began to run, with surprising quickness, towards Barnesdale. Stuteley encountered her presently, and was at first prepared to treat her in rough fashion. "Hold your hand, sweet Will," cried Robin. "It is I, your master. Summon our fellows and return with me speedily. My Lord of Hereford is come again to Sherwood." When Will had done laughing, he blew his horn. "Why, mistress," said he, turning his grinning face to Robin Hood as though seized with a notion, "is not this the day when the knight Sir Richard of the Lee, he to whom you gave Arthur a Bland, swore he would return to pay us our moneys?" "'Tis near the time, in sooth," admitted Robin. "Then surely he hath sent the bishop to us, not being able to come himself," argued Will. "We will see if the bishop is carrying 400 gold pennies with him. If it be so, then I am right indeed." The bishop, for all his bold words, had not yet nerved himself to give the necessary command of death against the person of Robin Hood. Since he would not come out of the cottage, the door must be beaten down. When this had been done, the bishop's men had peeped in. "He is in here, hiding," they cried exultingly. "Shall we slay him with our pikes?" "Nay, keep watch upon and guard this cottage against all comers. Go one of you to Nottingham with all speed and bring the sheriff to us with many men. Say that I bid him here to settle matters with Robin Hood." The good Bishop of Hereford did not intend to give this villain a single chance. Were he brought out into the open, he might by some magic contrive an escape. Lying in this hut, under the pikes of the bishop's men, he was safe, and if the worst came to the worst, might readily be slain. The messenger, detached from his escort, had not carried the bishop's message to the sheriff very far ere his master would have wished to change it. In a moment, whilst my Lord of Hereford was complacently gloating over his capture, whilst indeed he was himself peering into the dark cottage in order to catechize his prisoner, there appeared on the high road the shabby figure of that very old woman who had innocently helped to set the trap. She called out in a strident voice to the soldiers about her dwelling. "Stand by, lazy rascals!" cried she. "Stand away from my gates! What are you doing on my ground?" "Madam," answered the bishop, turning round to her, "these are my men, and I have given them the order to guard this cottage." "God a mercy!" swore the beldame harshly. "Things have come to a pass, in sooth, when our homes may be treated like common jails. Take away this robber and your fellows from my house on the instant, or I will curse you all in eating and drinking and sleeping." "Not so fast, mother," argued the bishop, smiling easily at her simulated rage. "All this has been done by my orders, and is therefore in law." The old woman clapped her hands impatiently. At the signal, the greenwood men sprang out on all sides of the cottage. The bishop saw himself and his men at arms trapped, but he determined to make a fight for it. "If one of you but stir an inch towards me, rascals," he cried spitefully, "it shall be to sound the death of your master Robin Hood. My men have him here under their pikes, and I will command them to kill him forthwith. Further, he shall be killed an you do not at once disperse." Then Robin stepped out before his men. He flung off the old crone's cap, which he had worn so cleverly. "Come kill me then, lord," he called cheerfully. "Here am I, waiting for your pikes and their pokes. Hasten to make sure business of it, for I am in no gentle humour." The old woman, who in the garb of Robin Hood had been lying silent and still so long within the cottage, jumped up then quite nimbly. In all the bold absurdity of her disguise, she came to the door of the cottage and looked forth. "Give you good den, my lord bishop," piped she. "And what make you at so humble a door as this? Do you come to bless me and give me alms?" "I marry, that does he," said Stuteley, coming forward. "To you, mother, and to us also. You must know that my lord bears with him a bag of 400 pieces from Sir Richard of the Lee, who did borrow this money from us to lend it to my lord." "Now, by all the saints," began the bishop. "They are watching you, brother," said Stuteley impudently, "so be wary in your speech. Give into my hand the 400 pieces which you took from the knight I have named. You cannot deny that you did take them from him in the June of last year." "The knight owed them to me, villain," said the bishop furiously. He saw that his men were outnumbered, and that all the outlaws had drawn bows aimed against them and him. A word not to the liking of these desperate fellows would loosen 50 horrid shafts upon him. "Sir Richard did owe them to me," he repeated, omitting the epithet. "Hark now to that," said Robin, still in his disguise. "Listen to it, friends, for ye all were witnesses that Sir Richard swore to me that the bishop had robbed him, and sought to rob him more. Did you not, in honest truth, lend the knight 400 pieces, my lord?" "I did not lend him that precise amount," admitted the bishop. 400 pieces included also the interest of the sum I gave." "Ho! You gave!" Robin snapped up the word. "You gave it, my lord?" "I will not bandy words with you, you false villain," shouted the bishop, suddenly losing control of himself. "Why do you not charge them, men? Take the word from me and hew these fellows down as they stand." "They will be well advised to remain as they are," spoke Robin. "See now how we command you all." He took a bow and arrow out of Much's hands and sped a shaft so truly towards the purpling bishop that his mitred cap was sent spinning from off his bald head. My lord turned green and yellow. He had thought himself dead almost. "Take my money, rascals," he quavered feebly, and Stuteley approached him, cap in hand. "Tied to the saddle of my palfrey, you will find my all," murmured the bishop, sighing deeply. Stuteley took a well-filled bag from under my lord's empty saddle. He spread his cloak upon the road and counted out 400 pieces into it. "The interest, master?" asked Will, twinkling to Robin. "Pay that to this old woman who hath befriended and saved me, and give her further 200 of the pieces on thy cloak," commanded Robin. "We will share with her, even as she has already shared with me this day." The outlaws then withdrew, taking with them the old woman and the bishop's gold. They left him in no great humour, but forbore to provoke him further. This adventure had, however, banished all hope of Robin making his projected journey into Nottingham. He had perforce to return to the caves at Barnesdale to get changed again into a more befitting dress. The day was old when he was ready to go out once more, and at Stuteley's entreaty Robin consented to wait until the morning. The bishop lost no time in making Nottingham. He and his men were so ashamed of having been overcome so easily by the greenwood men that they had perforce to magnify Robin's band and its prowess 20-fold. Amongst the many knights who had followed hopelessly in the princess's train was one whose attentions had ever been very noxious to her. This was a coarse, overfed, overconfident Norman, brutally skilful in the games at tourneys and ruthless in battles à outrance. His name was Guy of Gisborne, and he hailed from the borders of Lancashire. To him had fallen the rich, fat acres of Broadweald, that place for which poor Hugh Fitzooth had wrestled vainly for so long. He had persecuted her unavailingly. 'Twas through a scene with him that Scarlet had come so much into the maid's favour. Sir Guy had followed her to Nottingham, meaning to steal her from the sheriff at first chance. No Saxon churl shall hope to carry off this prize from me, thought Sir Guy. Her beauty pleaseth me, and her fortune will help mine own. Therefore I will follow her meekly until we come nearer to my own land. Then perhaps one night pompous Monceux may find her flown. He will be blamed, and none need know whether the little bird has gone, and by whom she hath been trapped. Sir Guy of Gisborne found another in the field with him. The princess had not waited for him to steal her. The little bird had flown ere Sir Guy's trap had been set. So the Bishop of Hereford found both the sheriff and Sir Guy in evil humour. My lord told his story, raging against Robin. The sheriff had his complaint, directed against the princess in general, and no man in particular. "Depend on it, Monceux, this rascal has stolen away your charge," said the bishop, in order to stir the sheriff to greater lengths against Robin. "How can you sit here so idly, first losing your gold plate to him, and then your gold? Now with one blow goeth this princess, who was most solemnly committed to your charge, and with her your good name, for without doubt this matter will cost you your office." Monceux was overcome with terror. His eyes started out from his head. "I did hear them speak of some girl betwixt themselves, now that I think on it," continued the bishop artfully, noting the effect he had made. "This woman shall share with us." "Ay, those were Robin's very words. The princess hath been stolen by him. She last was seen walking towards the woods." "'Tis true," murmured the unhappy sheriff. "But truly I am not to blame in this plaguey business." "I will encounter the villain for you, sheriff," said Sir Guy, with a cunning glance. "And if I do rid you of him, will you swear to stand by me in another matter?" "Surely, surely." "Your word on it, then, here in my lord's holy presence," Sir Guy went on. "This girl hath been told by a council of wiseacres that she must marry some Saxon noble, but her heart is given to another, to myself, in short. Swear that you will both help me to win her, and I will take her from your merry Robin and kill him afterward." They both promised readily that they would do all that he could ask, if only he would kill Robin Hood outright. The bishop had great influence at court, and Sir Guy intended that he should smooth matters for him after the abduction of the princess. The Sheriff was to hold fast to any story that might be necessary, and to swear to the little princess that Sir Guy of Gisborne was the very Saxon whom she had been ordered to marry. "All this is settled between us," observed the knight comfortably. "Give me a number of men, all of them good archers, and put them at my sole command. I will go forth tomorrow in a disguise such as will deceive even your wonderful Robin. We will hold over the hanging and flaying of the other rascal until his master can dance beside him," cried the Sheriff, conceiving Robin to be already caught. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 30. Robin started out early in the day towards the city. This time nothing should stay him from entering it and finding Marian. The Demoiselle Marie's plan would surely have succeeded on this day, for Robin was careless of all things but the hope of seeing his dear. Sir Guy of Gisborne was there, however, as Robin's good angel, as we are to see, although Sir Guy had, in truth, no very merciful feelings towards the outlaw. Robin perceived on the high road a very strange figure coming towards him. It seemed to be a three-legged monster at first sight, but on coming nearer one might see that 'twas really a poorly clad man, who for a freak had covered up his rags with a capul hide, nothing more nor less than the sun-dried skin of a horse, complete with head and tail and mane. The skin of the horse's head made a helmet for the man, and the tail gave him the three-legged appearance. "Good morrow, gossip," said Robin cheerily. "By my bow and by my arrows, I could believe you to be a good archer. You have the shape of one." The man took no offence at this greeting, but told Robin that he had lost his way and was anxious to find it again. "By my faith, I could have believed that you had lost your wits," thought Robin, laughing quietly to himself. "What is your business, friend?" he asked aloud. "You are dressed in strange clothes, and yet seem by your speech to be of gentle blood. And who are you, forester, to ask me who I am?" "I am one of the King's Rangers," replied Robin, "and 'tis my part to look after the King's deer and save them from the wicked arrows of Robin Hood." "Do you know Robin Hood?" asked the man, shrewdly eyeing him. "That I do, and last night I heard that he would be coming alone in a certain part of this wood to meet a maid." "Is that so, indeed?" cried the man eagerly. "'Tis very truth," answered Robin, "and I, knowing this, am going to take him and carry off both the girl and the reward upon his head. Tell me, friend, is this girl a little creature, royal-looking and very beautiful?" "Marry, she appeared to me a very princess," cried Robin, with enthusiasm. "We are well met," remarked the yeoman presently, and speaking as if come to a decision. "Now I will tell you, friend, that I am in search of Robin Hood myself, and will help you to take him. I am Sir Guy of Gisborne, and can make your fortune for you." "And I am Robin Hood, so prithee make it quickly for me," cried Robin impudently. Sir Guy was not taken so much aback as Robin had hoped. Quickly he drew his sword from underneath the capul hide, and he smote at Robin full and foul. Robin parried the thrust with his own true blade, and soon they were at a fierce contest. They fought by the wayside for a long time in deadly anger, only the sharp clashing of their blades breaking the silence. Then Robin stumbled over the projecting root of a tree, and Sir Guy, who was quick and heavy with his weapon, wounded Robin in his side. The outlaw recovered himself adroitly, and, full of sudden rage, stabbed at the knight under and across his guard. The capel hide hindered Sir Guy in his attempt at a parry. The horsehead fell across his eyes. Next instant Sir Guy of Gisborne went staggering backward with a deep groan, Robin's sword through his throat. "You did bring this upon yourself," muttered Robin, eyeing the body of the knight in vain regret. "Yet you did fall bravely and in fair fight. You shall be buried honourably." He dragged the body into the bushes, and having taken off the horsehide, slipped it upon himself. He then perceived that hanging from the dead man's belt there was a little silver whistle. "What may this be?" thought Robin. Sir Guy, clothed in old and ragged dress, looked to be a plain yeoman, slain in defence of his life, or mayhap a forester. Pulling the hide well over himself, Robin put the little whistle to his lips and blew it shrilly. Instantly, far off to the right of him, sounded an answering note, and again from behind him there was reply. In about 4 or 5 minutes 20 of the Sheriff's best archers came running through the wood to Robin's side. "Did signal for us, lording?" asked the leader of them, approaching Robin. "Ay, see him? I have encountered and slain one of your robber fellows for ye," answered Robin, simulating Sir Guy's voice and manner. "I would have you take up his body upon your shoulders and bear him along this little path, wherefrom he sprang upon me." The archers obeyed him immediately. "Do you follow us, lording?" they asked. "I will lead ye," cried Robin, waving his red sword truculently. "Follow me speedily." Thus he led them after him through the secret paths into Barnesdale, and there blew his horn so suddenly that Stuteley and his fellows were upon the Sheriff's men ere they might drop Sir Guy's dead body to the earth. Robin bade his men disarm the archers and tie such of them as would not prove amenable. Thus the Sheriff was robbed of his best archers, for these fellows, finding the greenwood men to be of such friendly mind, soon joined in with them. "This is well done, in sooth," said Robin gently to himself. "A good day's work, and Monceux will have cause to regret his share in it. Yet I am no nearer Nottingham after all, though I have twice sworn that naught should stay me, Stuteley," added he aloud, calling his squire to his side. "See you that this dead knight be buried with all respect. He fought me well and fairly." "It shall be done, master," answered Will Stuteley. "You may be easy about it. But I would have you listen to the talk of these archers. They have grave news of our comrade Little John. It seems that the Sheriff hath seized him for the killing of thy maid's father, and will presently have him dreadfully hanged and burned." Robin uttered an exclamation of horror. Soon the terrible story was told him, and his brain reeled under the shock of it. All that night he paced the woods until the dawn, then fell incontinently into a deep and heavy slumber. "Disturb him not, nor let him take action until I do return," said the comfortable Friar Tuck in businesslike manner. "I know how his distemper will play upon him, and how he will bring us all to grief if he attempts the city again. Now, I may go in and out as I will, being a curtal friar, and not now remembered in these parts. I will visit the Sheriff and ask for leave to confess Master Little John. Then I will come back to you with the best news I may." Geoffrey of Montfichet had ridden into Nottingham on the day before Sir Guy had left it. Carfax had known where the princess might be found all the while his master, with the bishop, was busy persuading the Knight of Gisborne that the maid was with Robin. One might be sure, however, that neither Monceux nor Carfax gave out any hint of this knowledge, for to do that would have stayed Sir Guy in his praiseworthy attempt upon the bold outlaw. Geoffrey, Master Scarlet, had found difficult word before him, but he intended to save Little John. He was convinced that the cook had slain Fitzwalter, most likely at the command of some other person interested in the death. Who might this be? Who had profited by the death of so unassuming a man as the late city warden? Carfax treated Scarlet with scant ceremony. The lean-faced fellow devoured the item that the Princess of Aragon was safe at Gamewell, but gave nothing in return. Scarlet had been left to cool his heels in the great hall of Nottingham Castle for near an hour afterward, while Simeon Carfax was closeted with the sheriff. They were having a tidying of the rooms in honour of the bishop's visit. Whilst Scarlet impatiently waited the good pleasure of Master Carfax, the maids were busy carrying many things to and fro: fresh rushes to strew my lord's rooms, candles and tapers, silks and cloths, and brown ewers of water. All the rubbish and sweepings of the floors were borne out in great baskets to the courtyard. One of the maids, a plump, roguish, lazy wench, would only carry her basket so far as the hearth of the hall. A fire was there, why not use it? Also, she could ogle and throw sidelong looks at Master Scarlet, who, for his beard and 35 grave years, was none so bad a man. The girl was throwing into the open hearth a lot of ends of silk and combings from her mistress's room. She tossed the rubbish on the fire, at the same time eyeing Master Scarlet. Then, finding that he would not notice her, she poutingly returned with her basket upon a fresh journey. Scarlet came over to the fire to pick up some of the burning scraps. They were drifting over the hearth into the room dangerously, thanks to the maid's carelessness. He found in his hand a half-burned piece of parchment, which still fizzled and crackled in quaint, malicious fashion. Upon the parchment was an awkward writing, and some of the words showed up very black under the heat. Half idly, Scarlet tried to make sense of them. This: Dear child Marian, her affectionate father, Court of, in London town. So far did Master Scarlet read before suddenly the beginnings of the truth flashed upon him. This was the very letter which he had borne to Marian. How had it come into the castle? By what strange magic? Could Marian have carried it here herself? He remembered that she had given it to Robin, and that he had put it into his bosom. "Mistress, you seem indeed to be very busy this day," said Master Scarlet affably to the girl next time she appeared. "Do you prepare me a chamber? For it seems that I am to wait here for a week at least." "I am tidying my mistress's room, and have had hard work, I promise you," replied the girl impudently. "Mayhap you will give me a help whilst you wait, Sir Taciturn. This is the 5th basket of rubbish I have borne from the Demoiselle Marie's little cupboard." "I will readily help you, if you will help me," said Scarlet pleasantly. "Canst tell me who wrote this little paper? The writing seems familiar to mine eyes." "'Tis a piece of my lady's jesting," said the girl, after a glance at the parchment. 'Twas written in imitation of Master Fitzwalter's hand after we had searched his house last year. Ah, poor man, who would have then imagined so hard a fate for him?" She sighed prodigiously and rolled her eyes. "Tell me the story of this murder, mistress, I pray you." She was not loath to fall a chattering, and she told Scarlett all she knew of it. From the rambling history he discovered another strange fact, that Roger de Burgh had been cook in the Sheriff's household before he had gone to the Fitzwalter house. Slowly he began to see that the letter he had so blithely put into Marian's hand was a forgery, done by the clever fingers of the demoiselle Marie. So, thought he swiftly, Mistress Fitzwalter was prepared to return to this place in order that Robin Hood might visit her secretly. The house was watched by a spy from the Sheriff's own kitchen. Soon as Robin came, this spy was to give warning, or, if matters pressed, kill him. But after many months of waiting, Fitzwalter came instead. His quick mind, used to the intrigues and plots of a capricious court, had unravelled the mystery. Yet how could he act upon this knowledge in the midst of the enemy's camp? If the Sheriff could stoop already to such foul business as this, to what further lengths would he not go? Dismissing himself through the girl, Scarlett strode out of the castle. The air seemed fresher and more wholesome without. He enquired and found his way to the house of grief, and there asked audience with its little heartbroken mistress. Whilst Scarlett was plotting and inventing 100 schemes to save Little John, a poor wandering priest appeared one evening before the gates of Nottingham Castle. Most humbly he begged a little bread and a drink of water, and having received these, he blessed the place and all within it. "You should not bless all within this castle, Sir Priest," the Sheriff told him. Monceux had pompously administered to the man's simple wants with his own hands. "There is a villain in our cells who hath done wicked murder." The ragged friar asked who that might be, and when he had heard, said that at the least he would confess this poor misguided fellow, and so deliver his soul from everlasting punishment. The Sheriff was rather doubtful, but seeing that the priest had no weapon upon him, he gave a sign that he should be admitted to Little John's cell. There the friar found the big outlaw very dejected. "Give you good cheer, brother," said the friar gently. "I have come to pray with you." "What assistance can your prayers be to me?" asked Little John sharply. "I am to be hanged tomorrow morn, and all your prayers will scarce alter that." "Anger is a great sin," replied the priest. "I have no sins against God," said Little John. "I have always endeavoured to live easily and justly." Then the friar came up close to him and whispered something in his ear. The outlaw's expression altered at once. "By the Sheriff's rope," muttered he, quite in his old manner, "but I swear that if thou canst get me a weapon—" "Here is a little dagger," said Friar Tuck, pulling it out from under his gown. "'Tis small, but tomorrow it may be of use. I can do no more now, but be ready for us tomorrow. When the last moments are come, Robin Hood will not easily let you die. Be sure of it." The friar, after he had left the prison, ran all the way to Barnesdale under the stars. End of chapter 30.
Chapter 31 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul Creswick. Chapter 31. It was hardly dawn when a strong guard of soldiers was drawn up without Nottingham Castle, and the prisoner was dragged forth from his cell. Monsieur had wisely come to the conclusion that Sir Guy of Gisborne had also failed, and he saw no reason to delay Little John's execution. Early as was the hour, yet both the sheriff and the Bishop of Hereford were present. The space before the castle was thronged with people. Beside the prisoner walked the castle chaplain. The crowd swayed and roared, and a small disturbance broke out on the right of the sheriff. At once the soldiers hurried to quell it. As the prisoner neared the gallows, the crowd so bore upon the cart in which he stood upright that progress for a few minutes was out of all question. Another disturbance broke out in the rear of the procession. Next instant the prisoner was seen to have free hands. He stooped and sliced the cords about his feet, and releasing himself all at once he sprang out of the cart. Then was an uproar indeed. The soldiers had strict orders that the episode of Stuteley's escape was not to be repeated, but whilst they exerted themselves desperately, a sudden hail of arrows fell upon them from the sky, as it were. Robin Hood's horn was heard blowing merrily, and the sheriff saw the huge mob of people break up into billows of contending portions under his very eyes. "Lock the gates of the city!" screamed Carfax at his juncture. "We have them trapped at last." Little John was free and seized an axe. Much and Middle had brought bags of meal with them, and both repeated the miller's old trick of flinging the white meal into the eyes of the enemy. Robin had broken up his band into small parties, and all were engaged simultaneously. In less time than it takes to tell, the space without the castle was turned into pandemonium. Again and again Robin's horn sounded, calling them together, and slowly but surely his small parties formed up into a whole, beating their way through the crowd with their swords and axes. Soon as they were together, with Little John safely in the middle of them, they fell to their bows and sped a cloud of arrows amongst the sheriff's men. Then they turned to retreat, and fell back so suddenly that they had made good start ere Monsieur had divined their intent. They sped towards the north gate, that one being nearest to Barnesdale. Crafty Carfax had forestalled them, however. The north gate was closed hard and fast, and the bridge drawn. The outlaws doubled on their track, and they charged at their pursuers with lowered pikes and waving axes. The crowd before them yielded sullenly, and allowed them passage. "To the west gate, Robin, hasten!" cried a shrill voice. "'Tis more easily opened than the rest, and the bridge is down. Someone hath smashed the winch." Robin's heart leaped into his body. 'Twas the voice of Gilbert of Blois. "Marianne," breathed he, overcome with the terror for her. "Oh, my dearest!" "Follow, follow!" she cried, with flashing eyes. "There is not a moment to be lost." Robin saw that it was a matter of life or death now in any case. "To the west gate!" he called. "Locksley, a Locksley!" It was the old battle cry, and only a few of them remembered it. Yet it served, and served well. The greenwood men formed up into close ranks, and all followed the little page, shouting hastily, "Locksley, a Locksley!" In the rush and hurry, Robin saw that Scarlet was there, and Warrenton and Allan a Dale. And with the little page ran another, a fair-haired boy, with strangely familiar face. "'Tis Fennel," whispered Allan, at Robin's side. "She would not be left." He spoke as they ran, with the enemy now in full pursuit of them. Every now and again the outlaws turned and sped a hail of arrows into the mob behind them. The west bridge was gained, and Scarlet had dispossessed the warder of his keys in a moment. He unlocked the gates and flung them wide open. The two boys, for so they seemed, raced through and over the broken bridge, and Allan followed next. The outlaws were soon free of the town, and once more in their own element, but Little John must needs go back to cover the retreat with Stuteley. Carfax and the sheriff were close at hand with their men, furious and determined. Even as the last of Robin's men gained and fell over the bridge, Little John was wounded seriously by a shaft from Simon Carfax's bow. His cry brought Robin back to his side. In a moment Robin's arms were about him. "Lean him on my shoulder, dear heart," cried Robin, and sure 'twas a ludicrous sight to see this stripling seeking to hold up the great form of Little John. They ran along in this way, and the outlaws formed a bodyguard about them. Allan and those in front had fired the dray fruits of grasses, and the smoke began to roll heavily against the faces of the soldiers. This gave the greenwood men a small advantage, and they gained the open country. But not for long did the honours of this day rest on one side or the other. The sheriff and his fellows broke through the fire, and then it was seen that some of them were mounted on fleet horses. Little John begged to be left behind, and again did Robin try to rally him. Onward they ran, and presently found themselves approaching a hill thickly wooded about the base. They gained cover of these trees, and turned at bay. Hidden behind tree trunks they sent forth a death volume of peacock shafts to the sheriff. Master Carfax was seen to fall, and with him 6 of the horsemen. The soldiers halted and prepared their crossbows. A volley of their arrows crashed and splintered the trees, whilst Carfax rose up stiffly to give fresh orders. A duello commenced of longbow against crossbow, and as the freebooters could deliver near a dozen shafts to each bolt, they more than held their own. When a bolt did strike, however, death was instant. A man was shot near to Marian, and fell with his head shattered and ghastly. She gave a little scream, and put her hands over her eyes. Robin bade her to keep near him. "Behind me, sweetheart," cried he feverishly, "that not may hurt you save through me." So they fought for near an hour, and then the greenwood men saw that reinforcements were coming to their enemies. Robin's horn gave once more the order for retreat. Slowly they fell back through the woods and the rising ground. "Alas, alas!" cried poor Mistress Fennel, wringing her hands in utter forgetfulness that now she was dressed as a man. "We are undone. Here, come others to meet us with pikes and many men." Robin saw that upon the hilltop there was a grey castle. From its open gate there poured a motley crew, a crowd of men, armed rudely with pikes and with staves. They rushed downward to intercept the outlaws, as it seemed, and Robin thought that, in truth, he and his merry men were trapped at last. But, oh joyful sight! Foremost among those coming from the castle was the once mournful knight Sir Richard of the Lee. He was smiling now and very excited. "A hood! A hood!" he cried. "To rescue! A hood!" Never was there more welcome sight and hearing than this. Without a word the outlaws raced up to meet their timely friends, and gained shelter of the castle, whilst Richard kept the sheriff and his fellows at bay. Then, when all were safely across the little drawbridge, the knight gave the word, and fell back upon his stronghold also. The bridge was drawn, and the gates clashed together, almost in the frantic, hideous face of Master Symmie, upon whose features showed streaks of blood from his wound, and rage commingled. The knight stationed his men about the walls. Soon appeared Monsieur beneath them also, and demanding speech, he commanded the knight to deliver up Robin and his men upon pain of assault and burning of the castle with fire. Sir Richard replied briefly, "Show me your warrant, Sir Malapert, and I will consider it," he said from within the gates, and Master Monsieur had no warrant with him. "My word is enough for you, Richard of the Lee," roared he furiously. "Am I not Sheriff of Nottingham?" "You cannot be the Sheriff of Nottingham, good man," answered the knight, getting ready to close the wicket, "for he is Master Monsieur, and is busy escorting the Princess of Aragon towards York. Go to and mend your manners, rascal, and call away these ruffians with you." Then Sir Richard snapped to the wicket gate, and returned to Robin. "Well met, bold Robin," he cried, taking him by both hands. "Well met indeed. I had intended to ride forth this very day to your home in the woods, to pay you your moneys with my thanks added thereto. But you have happily saved me and mine the journey. Welcome to my castle, recovered to me by your generosity." Sir Richard presented his wife to Robin, and his son, who had but just returned from the Holy Land. The knight told him how the last few months had been most prosperous with them, instead of going so badly as he had feared, and explained that now, from one source and another, he was rich as of yore. "So when we have feasted, I will take you to my treasury, and there count you out thy money and its interest faithfully. Yet in ridding myself of this debt, I do not free from my life of the obligation." "You need say no more, Sir Richard," interposed Robin. "'Tis we who owe all to you. As for your debt, why, it hath been repaid me already by my Lord of Hereford. Is it not so, Stuteley?" The little esquire protested solemnly that the bishop had paid it to them as conscience money. "Then I will pay it again," cried the knight cheerfully, "sooner than be outdone by a bishop in the matter of honesty. And I have a few presents for you, but these I will show you later." Robin thanked him gratefully, and taking him on one side, told how boys' clothes were covering Mistress Marian and Dame Fennel at this instant. Would the knight's wife take charge of them, and find them some apparel as would ease one of them at least from most uneasy feelings? That evening, whilst Monsieur raged and stormed without, they all sat to a great feast. Little John was already so much recovered of his wound as to sing them a song, whilst Robin made sweet accompaniment upon a harp. The knight showed Robin pleasantly his treasury, and again implored him to take the 400 pieces of gold, if he would take no interest. But his guest was firm. "Keep the money, for it is your own. I have but made the bishop return to you that which he had first stolen from your hands." Sir Richard again expressed his thanks, and now led them to his armoury. Therein Robin saw, placed apart, 100 strong bows with fine waxen silk strings, and 100 sheaves of arrows. Every shaft was an ell long, and dressed with peacock feathers, and notched with silver. Beside them were 100 suits of red and white livery, finely made and stitched. "These are the poor presents we have made for you, Robin," said Sir Richard. "Take them from us, with 10,000 times their weight in gratitude." One of the knight's own men came forward to give a sheaf of arrows into Robin's hand, and behold, it was Arthur à Bland. End of chapter 31.
Chapter 32 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 32. A searching rain continued all that night. They had well expected to find the sheriff and his army encamped against them on the morrow. Strangely enough, the morning showed the countryside quiet and peaceful as of old. Monceux and his fellows, if there, were well hid indeed. Nothing might be seen of them. From the castle battlements, afar off, mysterious under grey opaque morning, lay Nottingham. The old town seemed to be yet asleep, but there was plenty of movement within its gates for all that. A messenger had come out hastily to Monceux, even while he and Carfax had been perfecting details of the siege which they intended to apply to the king's castle. This man brought the sheriff news of such moment as to cause him to give up the hope of catching Robin without another effort. My lord of Hereford had had the news from York. He had sped it to Monceux. "The king is abroad. Take care of thyself." That was the item, even as it had come in to Prince John from his cousin Philip of France. The king is abroad. Richard of England, the Lionheart, he whom all thought to be safely out of the country, some said in a foreign prison, others that he was fighting the Paynims in the Holy Land. In any case, he had returned, and now all such as the sheriff and the Bishop of Hereford must put their houses in order, and say, once and for all, that they would be loyal and plot no more with fickle princes behind their true king's back. Sir Richard of the Lee, whose son had so lately come home to his father's castle, could, and he had liked, have explained much to them. He knew that the king was in England, for had he not, but a few hours since, parted from him with a pardon in his hand and happiness in his heart? Friar Tuck, having been forced to run all night in order that he might be able to bring the news as to Little John in to Robin, had compensated himself for the loss of his repose by lying abed the better part of the next day. Stirring things were going forward in the old city of Nottingham, as we know, but only at dusk, when all was over and Robin and them all were safely lodged in Sir Richard's stronghold, did the worthy friar open his little wicket gate and remember him of his fasting dogs. He fed them, and passed the remaining hours of day in putting them through their tricks. Then, feeling that he had well earned a good meal, the friar took out some sumptuous fare from his larder, and arranged it conveniently upon the small wooden bench in his cell. He then lit a taper, as the night was at hand, bolted and barred his door, and drew his seat close to the promising board. He uprolled his eyes, and had commenced a Latin grace, when suddenly came interruption unpleasant and alarming. One of his dogs began to bark, deeply and resentfully. The others followed him in the same note, changing the calm stillness of the night into discordant, frenzied clamour. "Now, who in the name of all the saints cometh here?" exclaimed Tuck, wrathfully, proceeding to bundle his supper back into the small larder. "May perdition and all the furies grant that he may evermore know the pangs of an empty stomach." His pious wishes were rudely interrupted by a loud knocking upon the door of his hermitage. "Open, open!" cried a strident voice. "I have no means of helping you, poor traveller," roared the friar. "Go your way into Gamewell. 'Tis but a few miles hence upon a straight road." "I will not stir another yard," said the voice, determinedly. "Open your door, or I will batter it down with the hilt of my sword." The priest then, with anger glowing in his eyes, unbarred the door and flung it open. Before him stood the figure of a knight, clad in black armour and with visor down. The Black Knight strode into the friar's cell without waiting for invitation. "Have you no supper, brother?" asked the knight, curtly. "I must beg a bed of you this night, and fain would refresh my body ere I sleep." "I have naught but half of mine own supper to offer you," replied Tuck. "A little dry bread and a pitcher of water." "Methinks I can smell better fare than that, brother." And the Black Knight offered to look into the larder. This was more than Tuck could bear, so he caught up his staff and flung himself before his guest in a threatening attitude. "Why, then, if you will," cried the knight, and he struck the priest smartly with the flat of his sword. The friar put down his staff. "Now," said he with meaning, "since you have struck me, we will play this game to a fair finish. Wherefore, if you are a true knight, give me your pledge that you will fight me on tomorrow morn with quarter-staff until one of us shall cry enough." "With all my soul," cried the knight readily, "and will give more knocks than ever you have given your dogs." "One gives and takes," retorted Tuck, sententiously. "Put up your sword and help me to lay supper, for I am passing hungry." They spread the supper table between them, and once again the friar sat down hopefully. He spoke his grace with unction, and was surprised to hear his guest echo the Latin words after him. The knight unlaced his helm and took it off. He appeared as a bronzed and bearded man, stern-looking and handsome. They then attacked the venison pasty right valiantly, and pledged each other in a cup of wine. The good food and comfort warmed them both, and soon they were at a gossip, cheerful and astounding. So they passed the time till the hour grew late, and both fell asleep together, almost in their places, by the despoiled supper table. In the morning they breakfasted on the remains, and then they washed their faces in the jumping brook. The knight told the priest that he had left his companions at Locksley on the previous evening. He asked so many questions as to Robin Hood and his men that the priest had to fence very skilfully. If the knight had been in a hurry before, he seemed now to have changed his mind. He said that he would wait for his companions if the priest could bear with him, and Friar Tuck, having taken a great liking to this genial traveller, made no complaint. I must presently journey forth to visit a poor man who lieth on a sick bed, said the friar, thinking of Robin. Mayhap we may travel together, suggested the knight. I am going, so soon as friends have found me, into Gamewell. I go into Barnesdale, said Tuck quickly, which is in quite another direction. At last the knight said he must go on, with or without his fellows, and he took up his sword. The friar then got out 2 quarterstaves, full 9 feet long. Without a word he handed one to the knight. He took it, and eyed the friar whimsically. Then, seeing no sign of relenting in him, shrugged his shoulders. He put off his helm again, and both going out to the little glade by the ruined shrine of St. Dunstan, they prepared for a bout with the staves. For all his plumpness, Tuck was no mean opponent at the game. He skipped and flourished about and around the knight in a surprising way, and gave him at last such a crack upon his crown as made the tears start. Then the Black Knight struck in mighty wrath, and soon the blows of their staves were making the welkin ring. So busy they were as to give no heed of the approach of a goodly company of men. It was Sir Richard of the Lee, with his son and retinue, journeying in a roundabout way in order to throw Monceux off the scent, and so give Robin a chance to reach his stronghold in Barnesdale. Both knights paused in amazement to see this furious combat. At last the Black Knight brought down his staff with a noise like felling timber upon the shoulder of the priest. Tuck staggered and dropped his staff. "Enough, enough," he cried, then fell in a heap upon the wet grass. The knight flung away his staff and ran to help him. He lifted up the priest's head and put it on his knee. Glancing up, he espied them all staring at him. "Run, one of you, and bring me some water." Sir Richard of the Lee started when he heard that voice. He turned to his son, but already the young man had doffed his helm and was filling it with water from the brook. He brought it quickly to the Black Knight, and offering it, kneeled before him in deepest respect and affection. "I thank you, child," spoke the Black Knight graciously. "See, this good fellow hath but swooned, and already doth revive. Are these your men, and this the father who gave his all for you?" Sir Richard drew nearer and kneeled as his son had done, whilst the servitors looked on in strange fear. "Arise, honest man," said the Black Knight with feeling. "I know your story, and have pardoned your son. What can I give to you to show how we esteem a man just and faithful, even in adversity?" "Sire," faltered Sir Richard, rising and standing with bared head before him, "if I might ask aught of you, I would crave amnesty for myself and for my men. You will hear, ere long, how we have befriended one Robin Hood, an outlaw of these woods. Through his generous help I was able to disencumber my estates, and yesterday, seeing him hard pressed, I opened my hall to him." "I will hear the story," the Black Knight said briefly, "and then I will judge." He turned to Tuck, who was now sitting up and gazing about him in bewildered fashion. Take my hand, brother. Let me help you to your feet. Tell me, said the friar, leaning on the knight, after he had risen, was that a bolt from the sky which just now did strike me down? I do fear it was this staff, brother, answered the other, smiling, with my poor arm to guide it. 'Twas an ill requital for your hospitality, and I ask your forgiveness. So small a thing as man's forgiveness of man, spoke Tuck sententiously. I freely accord it to you. He peeped at Sir Richard and recognised him at once as the knight of the woeful visage. He made no sign of this knowledge, however. Are these your companions, Sir Knight, of whom you did tell me last night? He asked, indicating the others with a wide gesture. Why, yes and no, brother, replied the knight whimsically. They are not my companions in a sense, and yet I do purpose to make them such forthwith. But come, 'tis time for me to be stirring, and I would make an end of my quest. I will be frank with you, brother. I seek Robin Hood, and had hoped that he might be attending you today in this very place. The friar put up his hands with an exclamation of horror. I am a lover of peace, Sir Knight, and do not consort with such as these. Nay, I think no harm of Master Hood, the knight hastened to say, but I much yearn to see and speak with him. If that be all, and you will come with me, said Tuck, scenting a good prey for Robin, I will undertake to show you where these villains say their nightly mass. I could not live long in this wood without knowing somewhat of Master Hood, be sure, and matters of religion have perforce my most earnest attention. I will go with you, brother, said the Black Knight. The friar led the three to his cell. Bid all the men return to your castle, the Black Knight commanded loudly, save 4 of those most to be trusted. Under his breath he bade Sir Richard tell his fellows to pretend to disperse, and to follow stealthily after their master soon as an hour was gone. Friar Tuck had produced some old monkish gowns from under a bench. He bade the 7 of them put them on, the 3 knights and the 4 chosen men. We will attend the mass as brothers of my order, which is Dominican, as you may see, explained Tuck easily. You, Sir Knight of the Iron Wrist, shall wear this dress, which was an abbot's once. I would we had a horse for you. It would be more seemly, and less like to rouse suspicion. Sir Richard said that there were horses with his men in plenty, and one was readily obtained for the Black Knight's use. The little cavalcade set out for Barnesdale, the friar joyfully leading the way. The servitors affected to return to Sir Richard's castle, but hid themselves in the bushes instead. After going deeper and deeper into the forest, they came at last to a part of Watling Street, and there was Robin Hood with a score of his men. He was watching the road for Monceux, having a notion that the sheriff would try now to take them in the rear. Recognizing Tuck at once, Robin walked boldly up to them. By your leave, brothers, cried he, and taking hold of the bridle of the knight's horse and stopping him, we are poor yeomen of the forest, and have no means of support, thanks to the tyranny and injustice of the Norman nobles in this land. But you abbots and churchmen have both fine churches and rents, and plenty of gold without. Wherefore, for charity's sake, give us a little of your spending money. We are poor monks, good Master Hood, cried Tuck in a wheedling tone. I pray you do not stay us. We are journeying with all speed to a monastery in Fountain's Dale, which we hear hath been deserted by its owners." "I can tell you much concerning this very place," said Robin. "Give me alms, and I will open my lips to purpose." The pretended abbot spoke now. "I have been journeying, good Master Hood, with the King," said he, in full deep voice, "and I have spent the greater part of my moneys. 50 golden pieces is all that I have with me." "It is the very sum I would ask of thee, Sir Abbot," said Robin cheerily. He took the gold which the other freely offered, and divided it into 2 even sums. One half he gave to those with him, bidding them take it to the treasury. The other he returned to the knight. "For thy courtesy, Sir Abbot, keep this gold for thine own spending. 'Tis like that you will journey with the King again, and need it." "I will tell you now," said the pretended abbot, "for I see that you are truly Robin Hood, although so small a man, that Richard of the Lion Heart is returned to England, and hath bid me seek you out. He hath heard much of you, and bids you, through me, to come into Nottingham, and there partake of his hospitality." Robin laughed heartily. "That is where we may not venture, Sir Abbot, since we value our skins. But where is your authority?" The knight produced the King's seal from under his abbot's gown. Robin looked at it and fell at once upon his knees. "I love a true man," cried he, "and by all hearing my King is such a one. Now that he is come to take sovereignty over us, we may hope for justice even in Nottingham town. I thank you for your tidings, Sir Abbot, and for the love I have of valour and all true kingly virtues. I bid you and your fellows to sup freely with us under my trystal tree." He then offered to lead them into Barnesdale, and the pretended monks, after a short discussion, agreed to accept his offer. They soon were come before the caves of Barnesdale, and were presented to those of the band already there. Presently Robin blew 2 blasts upon his horn, and the rest of the greenwood men made their appearance. All were dressed in their new livery, and carried new bows in their left hands. Each one knelt for a moment before Robin, as leader of them, ere taking his place. A handsome, dark-haired page stood at Robin's right hand, to hold his cup for him and pour him wine. The signal was given. Robin graciously placed the abbot in the place of honour, and under the cool, fresh evening, bright still with the aftermath of the day, the banquet was begun. The Black Knight was struck with astonishment. By all the saints, thought he, this is a wondrous sight. There is more obedience shown to this outlaw man than my fellows have shown to me. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 33. After supper, Robin signalled to his men to bend their bows. The knight was startled, for he thought they intended to choose him for their target. He was quickly undeceived, however, for 2 arrows were set up as butts for these archers. The knight marvelled indeed to see so small a mark given in this waning light. A garland of leaves was balanced on the top of each arrow, and Robin laid down the rules. Whoever failed to speed his shaft through this garland, and it was to be done without knocking it off the arrow, was to yield up his own shaft to Robin, and receive also buffet from the hand of Friar Tuck. "Master," said Stuteley, "that may not be, for the good friar is not yet come to confess us this day." He winked his eye at Robin, well knowing that the friar sat near to the other monks. "Doubtless he will be here ere the game be ended. I prithee commence as soon as I clap my hands." Little John limping, Stuteley, and old Warrenton each flew their arrows truly through the garlands, as did many of the rest. Poor Midge and Arthur a Bland were not so fortunate, for though both came near to doing it, the garlands unkindly fell off an instant after their shafts had flown through them. "Where is the friar?" cried Robin, affecting to peer into the distance, already blue-grey with twilight. "Surely he is late to-night." Then Tuck could bear it no longer, but stood up in his place. "Come near to me, thou villainous archers," he roared, "and I will buffet you right well." "Ah, brother, what are you saying?" cried the knight anxiously. "Surely you forget our vows and our cloth." "I forget neither the one nor the other," returned Tuck. "But I would be no true man did I submit to watch quietly such bungling as these fellows have done. Come hither, Midge." "You know them? You are of this company?" continued the knight, as if in alarm. "I am very proud to be of it, brother," said the friar. "I crave a boon," the knight then said, turning to Robin. "This is a little man who will receive the buffets, and though I seem a priest, yet am I willing to take the blow instead. If you would care to have a buffet from me," the friar cried, "you are most welcome, for though my arm is sore still from our play of this morn, I warrant me there is still some strength left in it." And he rolled up his sleeve. "Take, then, the first blow," said the knight, "and I promise you I will return it you with interest." A smile lit up the face of the jolly friar. He turned up the sleeve of his cassock still further, and smote the false abbot such a blow as would have felled an ox. "Thou hittest well, brother," the knight remarked coolly. The friar was amazed to see him withstand such a blow, and so was Robin. "Now 'tis my turn," the knight said, and baring his arm he dealt Tuck such a blow as to send him flat on his back. There was a general laugh at this, but the exertion had caused the abbot's cowl to slip away from his head. The strong face and light beard of the Black Knight showed plainly to them all. "Alas, your Majesty," cried Sir Richard of the Lee, "you have betrayed yourself." "It is the King!" cried Scarlett in sheer surprise, and reverently he knelt before the Black Knight. Robin glanced questioningly towards the greenwood men, then knelt himself beside Scarlett. At once the whole company fell upon their knees also. "My lord King," said Robin in hushed voice, "I crave mercy for my men and for myself. We have not chosen this life from any wickedness, but rather have come to it perforce." The King towered amongst them. "Swear," cried he, in clear, loud voice, "swear that you will forsake your wild ways, Robin Fitzooth, and will come with your men into my court, and be good and faithful subjects from this night, and I will give you all the pardon that you crave." "We will come into your court and into your service, sire," answered Robin gratefully, "nor ask anything better in this world than that." The King bade them rise and continue their sports. "Night is come, and I must ask a lodging of you, even as your chaplain gave me of his hospitality yestere'en," he said comfortably. "And tell me, Robin, where is your Marian? What laggard in love are you to be here without her?" "Nay, sire," said the little page, coming forward, "Robin is no laggard, nor am I far to seek. He is a very valiant, honourable man, and should indeed be a knight of this realm if all men had their deserts." Richard smiled then, and bent his haughty head to kiss the little hand she had extended to him. "Thou speakest truth, lady," he answered, "and I had not forgotten how the fair lands of the Broadweald once were in Hugh Fitzooth's honest keeping. It may be that they will return to his son one day, for folks tell me that Guy of Gisborne is no more." He turned to Scarlett. "And you are Master Geoffrey of Montfichet," said he, fixing his keen eyes on the other's face, "son of my father's friend, George Montfichet of Gamewell. And prithee, Master Geoffrey, what have you done with my little cousin, Amy of Aragon?" Scarlett confusedly explained that she was safe in his father's hall at Gamewell. "It seemeth, then, that you also have stolen from our sheriff at Nottingham, Master Scarlett," Richard observed, quizzing him. "Surely all men's hands are against Monceux." "Even as all men's hands are against venomous reptiles and the like," observed the friar, nodding his head. He had recovered from the buffet which Richard's hand had dealt, and had seated himself conveniently to watch the scene. He was truly the one least put about by it. The King eyed him and smiled to note his quiet self-possession. "What can I find for you, brother?" he asked indulgently. "Some fat living where there are no wicked to chastise, and where the work is easy and well endowed?" "I only wish for peace in this life," replied the friar. "Mine is a simple nature, and I care not for the gewgaws and shams of court. Give me a good meal and a cup of the right brew, health and enough for the day, and I ask no more either of my God or of my king." Richard sighed. "You ask the greatest thing in the world, brother, contentment. It is not mine to give or to deny. Yet if I can help you find that wondrous jewel, I will do it right heartily." He glanced curiously from one to the other of the greenwood men. "Which of you is called Allan a Dale?" he asked. And when Allan had come forward, "So," said Richard half sternly, "you are the man who stole a bride from her man at my church doors of Plympton. What have you to say in excuse of this wickedness?" "Only that I loved her, sire, and that she loved me. Your Norman baron would have forced her to wed with him, desiring her lands, which since have been forfeited by my lord of Hereford," said Richard quickly. "I know your story, Allan. Take back your lands and hers from me this night, and live in peace and loyalty upon them with your dame. Fennel she is called, is it not so? 'Tis a pretty name." "I thank you humbly, sire," said Allan a Dale joyfully, "and Fennel shall thank you for herself. She will do it far better than I, be sure of it." "Where is your dame?" said the King, looking about him, and half expecting to find her clad, like Marian, in boy's attire. "She also is at Gamewell," said Sir Richard hastily. "We left her there this morning when on our way to Copmanhurst. The Princess will take her into her train and protect both Mistress Fennel and her lord." "Our Princess will need a protector for her own self, I am thinking," said the King, thoughtfully. "Come hither, Scarlet, and kneel before me." Geoffrey wonderingly did so. "Arise, Geoffrey, Earl of Nottingham," cried Richard, striking his shoulder with the flat of his sword. "Take back your freedom from my hands, and be no more ashamed to attend our court disguised and in false pretence. From this moment you have the overlordship of this forest for your father's sake and mine, and you are worthy to ask the hand of any woman in this realm." It was impossible not to perceive the King's gracious meaning, although Geoffrey could scarcely believe in his good fortune. He thanked his King in a voice full of gratitude and affection. "You did say that the Princess of Aragon might need a protector, sire," he added, trembling at his own audacity. "Will you grant me permission to be her champion and define the world?" "'Tis what I had promised for you, my Lord of Nottingham," said Richard, quietly, "and the best reason for your knighthood. Watch well over her and guard her from herself, if need be. For Much the miller, for Middle the tinker, for Little John, Stuteley, and old Warrenton, the King had kindly words. He knew them all, it seemed, and they marvelled more and more amongst themselves to hear how he was ware of all their histories. There was no adventurer, no man of them, whom he did not know by name and fame, at least, and this King proved so gracious and royal a man that all of them loved him forthwith and dubbed him in their hearts a right worthy monarch. They built a great fire, having now no more fear of Monceux or Hereford, or any one of them. The Sheriff would hold his office from Will Scarlet's hands from now. The archers from Nottingham, who had been kept as prisoners, were at once released, and the King signalled for Sir Richard's followers to appear. This they did with a rush, and Robin saw then how the King had held them all truly in his hand. For these fellows, and even Sir Richard of the Lee, their master, would have had to obey him had he ordered them to engage the greenwood men in sudden combat. As it was, all were merry and boon companions. Laughter and song floated upward as the jumping flames of the campfire they had built. The friar sang them the song which Robin had heard so often, and Robin himself played upon the harp. Night came and they slept, King of England and his subjects together, in all joy and happiness. The fire burned low, and deep Sherwood watched over them, Forest, mother of them all. Next morning the King asked if they had any spare liveries of the scarlet and white. "For," said he, "'tis only fair that I should lead you into the city of Nottingham, clad as you are yourselves, since you are now my bodyguard." So Nottingham awoke to find a great company of men approaching it. Foremost came a number of archers, dressed all in bright liveries, and carrying their bows unslung, in token of peace. Behind them marched a motley host, the servitors of Sir Richard and of old George of Gamewell, and last of all the Sheriff's own archers. Monceux came out to meet them with Master Simeon, whilst my Lord of Hereford watched furtively from the city walls. The chief of the approaching host rode forward, and his stern, dark face was plain to see. "'Tis the King!" cried Carfax, who knew Richard well. "Now may our tongues be politic and say the right words." "Go to meet him, Simeon," whispered the Sheriff, all in a flutter of fear and hope. "'Tis like that he hath encountered Sir Richard of the Lee, and so will know his story of things. Be prudent, be humble." But Richard waved Carfax haughtily aside. "I will speak with your master, fellow," he said harshly. Carfax shrank cringingly to one side, and Monceux dismounted from his milk-white horse to meet his king. "Greetings and welcome, sire, from this your faithful city," began Monceux very hurriedly. "The joyful tidings of your return were brought to me 2 days agone, and at once I did prepare for your coming." "With a hanging, to wit, and murderous attack upon the castle of this faithful knight?" said Richard. "A welcome not much to our mind, Sheriff." "Sire, when the hanging was going forward, I did not then know you were so near," explained Monceux, making matters worse. "And for the matter of that, 'twas for foul murder that I would have hanged the villain who did escape through your knight's evil practices. Thereby I do accuse Sir Richard of offending against the laws." "Enough, Master Monceux," interrupted the King contemptuously. "The murder was not done by the man whose life you did seek so earnestly to end. The killing of Fitzwalter, my warden of these gates, was due to the foul hands of your own cook, Roger de Burgh. As you have stomach for a hanging, see to it that this fellow be brought to book. Know you this writing?" And Richard showed him the parchment which Will Scarlet had found in the hearth of the hall at Nottingham Castle. Monceux turned green and white and gasped for air. "I had no hand in this dreadful business, sire, I swear it," he gurgled. "We did conspire between us to entice the maid Fitzwalter into Nottingham, I confess, hoping that Robin Hood, the outlaw, would come to visit her, and we might so trap him. He hath been the author of this mischief, I promise you, and is a villainous wretch. If Roger killed Master Fitzwalter, 'twas done in the belief that he was engaged with Hood." "As I thought," muttered the new Earl of Nottingham under his breath. "Therefore," said Richard slowly, "you, Monceux, knew all along that Little John was not guilty, yet did seek to hang him." "Sire, he stole my plate also, and had been excommunicated by my Lord of Hereford." "Take Roger and hang him speedily," cried the King to end it, "and bring me to the Bishop. Stay," he called to the quickly retreating Sheriff. "Ere you go, Monceux, learn that from henceforward you must look for patronage from this my Lord of Nottingham. He will be your master, and you will hold the fief of Nottingham Castle at his hands." "Will Scarlet? Master Geoffrey of Montfichet? You?" gasped Monceux. "Even I, Master Sheriff," replied the man of many names. "Know also, Monceux," added Richard, indicating Robin and his men, "these are my archers and especial guards. From now the ban of excommunication must be removed." The Bishop had come down from the walls and drawn nigh. "Fetch me book and candle, Carfax," said he, "and I will remove the ban." "You will be wise to do so, my lord," the King said, significantly. The Bishop deemed it prudent to give no particular heed to his sire's tone. At once he proceeded to take off the ban of excommunication he had so hastily pronounced upon Robin Hood and the rest of his merry men. "Now, Robin, take payment for your entertainment of me in the woods," the King said in a voice that would brook no denial. Robin drew near and kneeled before him doubtfully. "Rise, Robin of Huntingdon, first Earl of the Shire," cried Richard, tapping him with the point of his blade. "Take rank amongst my knights, and learn that thy king recognizeth above the other neither Saxon nor Norman of his subjects. All to me are English, and I love the man who is brave and who dealeth fairly as he may with his fellow men. You have kept the spirit of liberty alive in this my land, and I hold no anger against you because you have been impatient under wrong." His proud voice was silent, while Robin, Earl of Huntingdon, seized his king's hand to his lips and kissed it in a wonderment of gratitude. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Chapter 34. It was the wedding day of 4 happy people. The day was bright, the sky blue, and Sherwood had taken upon itself early summer raiment. The old church of Nottingham was already crowded to excess. The newly banded guard of royal bowmen, gay in their scarlet and white livery, were formed up in 2 straight lines from the church door to the lych gate. So soon as the weddings were over, all would go back to a great feast given at Gamewell Hall in honour of the day. Then afterward the 2 couples would go with the King into London, to be followed within 7 days by the rest of the royal guard. Richard meant to employ these fellows shrewdly and test their loyalty. Not for reasons of sentiment only had he forgiven Robin and his men. The hour was reached, and at once a small company was seen issuing forth from Nottingham Castle. Against his will, Master Monceux had given use of the castle to the 2 bridegrooms, the newly made Earls of Nottingham and Huntingdon. With Robin and Geoffrey were, firstly, old George of Gamewell, proud above all others in knowing that he now had a son who would ensure honour to the race of Montfichet all their days. The squire was happy and radiant. He walked between them and turned his head ever and again in laughing speech with Sir Richard of the Lee and his heir. Stuteley and Little John were next, the long and short of it, and after them the jovial Friar of Copmanhurst. Arthur à Bland, with a gold chain about his neck, given him by the knight Sir Richard, walked with Middle the tinker on his left and Much the miller on his right. Close behind trotted the small, complaisant Midge, dressed up very fine in a livery of purple doublet and green hose. They came to the lych gate, and the crowd jostled itself in its admiration. As they walked rather consciously up the narrow path between the smiling ranks of their fellows, the crowd cheered them radiantly. A Hood, a Montfichet, was called and called again. Some maids from the opposite windows threw them kisses and waved pretty kerchiefs in their honour. Within the church, waiting for them soberly at the chancel steps, was my Lord of Hereford, dressed out in his finest and richest robes, and beside him Friar Tuck. For Robin Hood and Will Scarlet the bishop had enmity and contempt, but towards the Earls of Huntingdon and Nottingham this time-serving man could only profess an abundance of respect. The brides were to be escorted from Gamewell by no other person than the King himself. He was to give them both in marriage, and had promised them jewels and to spare when they were come to court. Loud cheering and noise from the mob without the church told of their approach. The people were wild with joy at having their king amongst them like this. Citizens, burgesses, apprentices were all in their best, their wives and their sweethearts all dressed out in splendid attire, as the king jumped down from his horse before the lych gate and held out his strong hand to help the brides from off their milk-white mares. The whole place became alive with excitement and rapture. Little maids with baskets of violets and primroses flung their offerings prettily under the feet of the two beauteous, blushing brides, who leaned so timidly upon the king's proud arms. At last the service was begun, and both couples were well nigh wed. The bishop had spoken the Latin service impressively and with unction. In the first row stood Monceux, in all the pomp of his shrievalty, with his councilmen and aldermen. Master Simeon, with face leaner than ever and in-turning eyes, glared impotently at the chief actors in this historic scene. Alone missing from it was the cold, colourless beauty of the demoiselle Marie. She had taken herself to her room this morn, and had sworn never to leave it again. But now that the double marriage was nearly made, she suddenly appeared, thrusting her way rudely through the gathered crowd at the church door. She was wild-eyed, dishevelled, her dress fastened all awry. Folks looked once at her, and then exchanged glances between themselves. "Stay this mockery of marriage, my lord," she cried, fiercely facing the bishop. She had elbowed a path for herself to the chancel steps. "I do forbid the marrying of these two." She pointed a trembling finger from Robin to Marian. "This woman is blood guilty, and Holy Church may not countenance her," she shrilled, desperately. "'Twas she who foully killed Master Fitzwalter, her own father, and I have proof of it." "'Tis false!" roared Robin. Then beside himself, "You viper, you mean-souled spy, is no crime too great for you?" "There is no need for defence," spoke the king. "The charge is too wild and foolish an one. Seize this woman, some of you, and take her without. I will deal with her later." He imperiously signed to his guards, and at once the demoiselle was gripped harshly by both arms. "Be gentle with her," pleaded Marian. "She is distraught, and hath not command upon herself. I beg of you, sire, to forgive this. I have no quarrel with Mistress Monceux." The demoiselle had suddenly become quiet under the fierce hands of Much and Little John. She allowed them to thrust her ignominiously forth. At the door of the church she turned once, as though to renew her preposterous charges, but contented herself merely with a single glance toward them of malignant hate. Then she was gone, and people stirred themselves uneasily, as folks do when having been within touch of the plague. The Sheriff had stared with protruding eyes of horror and dismay upon his daughter. When he saw that she was gone, that the dreadful episode was done, he gasped hurriedly and sat down. His mind became confused, his vision obscured as by a cloud. The service was finished. Robin and Marian, Geoffrey and Amy, no longer of Aragon, were joined together for the rest of their lives. The bishop pronounced a blessing, and forgetting himself utterly in the emotion of the moment, spoke fervently and with purpose. The king kissed the brides, and after him their husbands kissed them also. Then all signed their names in the church books, and the trumpeters and heralds made music for them. They returned through the streets of Nottingham, gay now with flags and merry with a joyful populace. Loud cheerings rent the air, and people showered flowers and blessings upon them. Before the happy couples ran 6 of the greenwood men, loyal subjects now, flinging largesse upon the people right and left from out of well-filled bags. All the treasure that they had accumulated in their caves at Barnesdale the king's bowmen freely distributed this day. All were happy. The nightmare of unjust dealings, of Norman oppression, of laws for the poor and none for the rich, was ended. The king had said it, and the king had already made good the promise in his words. Afterward, at Gamewell, Richard conferred upon Montfichet full rank as Baron of the realm, with power to speak and vote in the Upper Court of Appeal, the highest rank in the land, next to the king himself. Sir Richard of the Lee and his son became members of the Star Chamber, with grants of land in perpetuity. Turning to Marian, the king wished her every joy that she could wish herself, and gave to her the lands of Broadweald in Lancashire to hold in her own right for ever. Thus you shall have wealth to share with your Robin, and I counsel you both to make good use of your days. My subjects who are loyal to me shall have no cause to regret it. I will give you, Amy, the castle of Aquitaine, which I held under my father's grant until his death. You know how fair a spot it is, and how sweet the sky of France. Help her to administer her riches, Geoffrey, wisely and well, and be you all ready when I shall call upon you. Now, God save you all. Amen. End of chapter 34. Epilogue of Robin Hood. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK. Epilogue. In all sincerity, there should be no more of this tale, seeing that we have found ourselves at last come from beginning to end of Robin's quarrellings with the Sheriff. Most histories end, and end properly, with just such a marriage as we have seen. Yet, to tell the truth, however strange and distressful is the business of a good historian, and so it must be written that in the end of it sad days came again for Robin Hood. For 5 years he lived in peace and prosperity, a faithful, loyal subject, having 2 sons born to him in his home in Broadweald. Then came the plague, raging and furious, and claimed amongst many victims Marian, Countess of Huntingdon. For a time Robin was as one distraught. He had no joy left to him. He was as one without energy or hope, a miser robbed of his gold, suddenly and cruelly. He gave his 2 boys into the charge of Geoffrey of Nottingham, and went on a journey to London, there to beg of the King that he might find him active employment, instead of being but one of a guard of honour, as he and his men had so truly become. Richard had already gone to France, and John was acting as Regent of England in his absence. "Go, shoot some more of my brother's deer," sneered the Prince, having heard Robin impatiently. "Doubtless if you do but slay enough of them, he will make you Privy Councillor, at least when he returns." This great insult fired Robin's blood. He had been in a strange distemper ever since the fatal day of his beloved's death. He answered the disdainful Prince scornfully, and John, growing white with anger, bade his guards to seize upon him. Faithful Stuteley helped his master to win freedom from the prison into which he had been flung, and with the majority of his men Robin returned to the greenwood life. The King's guard was broken up, for the King had no need of it, nor never would again. Legends are told of Robin's scorned defiance of the laws, but they are intangible and unauthentic. It is a sure thing, howbeit, that he did not revert to Sherwood and Barnesdale, as some aver, but rather took up his quarters near Haddon Hall in Derbyshire. There is a curious pile of stones and rocks shown to this day as the ruins of Robin's castle, where the bold outlaw is believed to have lived and defied his enemies for a year at least. 2 stones stand higher than the others. These are supposed to be the seats in the hall of this vanished stronghold, whereon Robin and Little John sat delivering judgment on matters of forest law. Another chronicle gives these stones as being the scene of a wondrous leap done by Robin, to show his men that strength and will were his yet. Robin Hood's stride, folks say. One thing is sure, that Prince John did not easily forgive or forget him. After many attempts made upon them at Haddon, some desperate enough in all conscience, Robin and his men were allowed to be at peace. In one of these encounters Robin was sorely wounded, and none but Little John knew of it. The wound was in Robin's breast, and looked but a small place. It bled little, yet would not heal, and slowly became inflamed in wider circles. Inwardly it burned him as with a consuming fire. His strength was sapped out from him, and his eyes began to lose their shrewdness. No longer could he split an arrow at 40 paces, as in olden days. At last he took Little John on one side. "Dear heart," said he, "I do not feel able to shoot another arrow, and soon the rest will know I am stricken sore. I have it in me to return to London, and there give myself to the Prince. Mayhap, if I did this, he would give you all amnesty here." "Sooner would I see you dead than you should do such a thing," cried Little John. "I swear it by my soul and by my body. Now listen, dear master, and I will tell you that I have heard of a wondrous cure for thee. An old beggar came this morn through the woods, and strangely, when he spied me, asked if there was not one amongst us ill and hopeless." "This beggar, where is he?" "He waits below," said Little John hurriedly. I bethought me to talk with Stuteley on the matter. The beggar told me that the Abbess of Kirklees had stayed him as he was travelling past her priory. Go to Haddon, brother, and there you will find Robin Hood sick unto death. Say that in the woods near by there is one who is practising magic upon him, having made a little image of Robin Hood. At each change of the moon, this rascal doth stick a needle into the waxen heart of this image, and so doth Robin slowly die. Tell him that the name of the man is Simeon Carfax." "Ay, by my soul, but I thought as much. What villainy, what foul villainy! Get me a horse, John, and one each for thyself and Stuteley." The beggar had gone when they went to the hall. None had offered to stay him. "Let us go quietly, swiftly," said Robin, "for I feel that my hours are short." They rode all through the day and night, and came upon the priory in early dawn, a quiet, strange building, surrounded by heavy trees. The journey and fierce excitement told upon Robin. His wound was beating red-hot irons into his heart. Hardly could they get him from his horse to the gate of Kirklees. Stuteley rang the bell loudly, and anon the door was opened by a woman shrouded in black. She spoke in a cold, low voice. "Is this Robin, Earl of Huntingdon?" asked she. "I pray God that it may be true, for at this moment the wizard is meditating his very death." "Tell us where this miscreant doth make his sorcery, good mother," cried Stuteley and Little John together, "and not all the magic in the world shall save him from our swords. Go out yonder to the left, where you will find a little stream. Near by it is a tree blasted by heaven's fires. Under the tree is the man, Carfax. I have watched and known him for many days. Go quickly, and I will tend to your master. See, already he swoons. The hour is very nigh." Carfax was then actually in France, acting against Richard. The two men gave Robin into her keeping with a fury of impatience, then, with brandished swords, ran swiftly in search of the wizard. Robin had swooned and lay a dead weight in the arms of the prioress. With amazing strength and tenderness she lifted his slight body and bore it to a little room near to the entrance of the priory. She laid the unconscious man upon a couch, then hastily bared his right arm. She paused an instant to throw back her hood, then taking the scissors of her chatelaine, suddenly and resolutely gashed the great artery in his arm. He gave a cry of pain and started up. Be still," she muttered, soothing him. "The pain is naught. It will cure thee. Lie back and sleep. Sleep." "Who are you?" he asked feebly, and with swimming eyes. Then blackness came upon him again, and he fell back upon the couch. Out of the night of pain, the cold face of the demoiselle Marie smiled mockingly at him. She raised herself and softly withdrew. As she locked the door upon him, she smiled thinly, wickedly. "So, Robin, at last, Robin," she murmured, "I am avenged." 2 hours later, Little John returned. Behind him was Stuteley, anxious and ashamed. They had found a man in the woods, and had killed him instantly in their blind rage, only to discover then that he was but a yeoman, and not him whom they sought. "I did hear my master's horn, mother," cried Little John, when the prioress had opened the wicket to them. 3 blasts it gave. "'Twas the wind in the trees," said she serenely. "He sleeps." She prepared to close the wicket quietly. "Disturb him not." But Little John was alarmed, and began to fear a trap. With his sword he hewed and hacked at the stout oak door, while Stuteley sought to prise it open. When it yielded, they rushed in upon a sorry scene. Robin lay by the window in a pool of blood, his face very white. "A boon, a boon," cried Little John, with the tears streaming from his eyes. "Let me slay this wretch and burn her body in the ruins of this place." His master answered him with a voice from the grave. "'Twas always my part never to hurt a woman, John. I will not let you do so now. Look to my wishes, both of you. Marian's grave, it is to be kept well and honourably, and my 2 sons, but Geoffrey will care for them. For me, dear hearts, bury me near by in some quiet grave. I could not bear another journey." They sought to lift him up. "Give me my bow," said Robin suddenly, "and a good true shaft." He took them from Stuteley's shaking hands, and leaning heavily against Little John's sobbing breast, Robin Hood flew his last arrow out through the window, far away into the deep green of the trees. A swift remembrance lit up the dying man's face. "Ah, well," he cried, "Will o' the Green, you knew. Marian, my heart, and that day when first we met beside the fallen deer, and she is gone, and my last arrow is flown. It is the end. Will." He fell back into Little John's arms. "Bury me, gossips," he murmured, faintly, "where my arrow hath fallen. There lay a green sod under my head, and another beneath my feet, and let my bow be at my side." His voice became presently silent, as though something had snapped within him. His head dropped gently upon Little John's shoulder. "He sleeps," whispered Stuteley, again and again, trying to make himself believe it was so. "He is asleep, Little John. Let us lay him quietly upon his bed." So died Robin Fitzooth, first Earl of Huntingdon, under treacherous hands. Near by Kirklees Abbey they laid to his last rest this bravest of all brave men, the most fearless champion of freedom that the land had ever known. Robin Hood is dead, and no man can say truly where his grave may be. At the least, it but holds his bones. His name lives in our ballads, our history, our hearts, so long as the English tongue is known. End of Epilogue. End of Robin Hood by Paul CRESWICK.